Not in any Gurdwara all over the world will you ever find a picture of KPS Gill, Sumed Saini, Indira Gandhi, but you'll find pictures of Sant Jarnail Singh everywhere. You'll find pictures of Shaheed, Singh, Singhnia, Pachangi in every single Gurdwara all over the world. And that shows you where the Panth sentiments lie. His other claim is, KPS Gill completely finished terrorism in Punjab. He moved in bomb-proof vehicles with a huge number of paramilitary officers even after his retirement. So if he finished so-called terrorism, if he finished the threat, why is his boss, Beyant Singh, who's the chief minister, assassinated in 1995? His claim, firstly, factually, is completely incorrect.
Gill was brought in to do a job. He did that job. It was his reputation in Assam of brutalizing protesters. He kicked a young protester to death.
KPS Gill was a coward, deep down. And these are the type of police officers Gill surrounded themselves with, cowards that were sadistic, that took pleasure in torturing.
Gill even says in an interview, he goes, we're like condoms. He goes, once they've used us, they'll just discard us.
Police officers openly firing at Sikhs. And Sant Jarnail Singh shows through the Dharmyod Morcha, through the Anandpur Sahib Mata, that you cannot negotiate with the Indian state. They literally treat our burnt bodies, our mutilated corpses as rubbish, and they put them in rubbish trucks.
You're talking about the Messiah of Punjab. KPS Gill until his last days had to live outside of Punjab under Z security. There was about 4 or 5 assassination attempts even in his retirement.
The people's sentiments and their support lies with the movement, not with KPS Gill.
Santi said that if this is the kind of thing that's going to happen with us, then it's better that we all fight and die than we live like this.
Their tactics have changed. They're just as, if not more, invested in challenging and changing Sikh perceptions. So that's why conversations like this are so important.
Welcome back, guys, to another Basics of Sikhi reaction video. We're again joined by 2 very special guests that you may have seen before, Bhai Shamsher Singh and Bhai Baljeet Singh. Today we're going to go through a interesting video that's come out recently, the brother of KPS Gill. It's got over 1.7 million views in the past 2 weeks. So we thought it was imperative actually to speak about. There was a lot of false kind of narrative, we could say, that he's been putting out. So it was important to put out the real message. Just to start off with, guys, who was KPS Gill?
So KPS Gill was the DGP, the Director General of Police, which is the senior most Indian police officer within a state of India, so like the highest level cop. And he was the DGP in Punjab between 1988 and 1990. He originally was posted in Assam, where he had a reputation for violence and brutality against demonstrators, etc. He was noted for his kind of conduct. And then he's handpicked, he's transferred to Punjab in 1984 with the aim of suppressing the Khalistan, Sangharsh, the Khalistan movement. And when he is the DGP, you see the peak of violence against Kharkus and their family members, the peak of killings of Sikhs in Punjab between that period. He was awarded numerous accolades and honors by the Indian government. He's been celebrated by them, still is, as a super cop, top cop.
Who gave him that title then?
The Indian police, the Indian government, and like the Indian media as well. I think politicians, etc., became kind of like his monkey, like super cop. Sikhs alternatively call him the Butcher of Punjab, him and Beyant Singh, who's the chief minister for a time period. And they were both called the Butchers of Punjab. And KPS Gill was known for, amongst Sikhs, and in the Indian administration, for his brutality, for his violence, the level of torture that he was prepared to deploy, how him and his police officers were given, a complete open slate in terms of the methods they were allowed to use against Sikhs and their families. So during his tenure, we saw some of the most egregious violence and torture against Sikhs and stuff that, till this day, human rights agencies are documenting and trying to get to the bottom of. But is known in the Panth through Taddiwara and the Shahadatan of Surme that withstood torture of the butcher police officers of KPS Gill, some whose bodies were never found, like by Jaswant Singh Kalra, others who were cut piece by piece, thrown on railway tracks. Countless sons of Punjab were thrown into the rivers, burnt alive, hacked apart. Insane torture methods that were used to instill terror amongst the Kharkus and their families and the people in Punjab when these types of stories would get out. Other human rights people that have looked into it have seen this pattern that it's not just, in one particular case. You see this pattern because there were methods that were deployed by police officers under the supervision of individuals like KPS Gill.
One interesting thing, I think we'll talk about it further in this podcast, but it's been 30 years, right? And why has his brother kind of come out now, and why are they putting this narrative out now? So we've chosen about 10 top clips, moments from this podcast, and we're going to kind of react to them, counter this kind of narrative they've given. So let's start with the first clip.
ਕੀ ਖੱਟਿਆ ਸਰ ਇੰਨੀਆਂ ਲਾਂਤਾਂ ਬੁੱਚੜ ਕਿਹਾ ਗਿਆ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਜੋ ਘਾਣ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਵਾਨੀ ਦਾ ਕਦੇ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਐਟਲੀਸਟ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਮਾਫੀ ਮੰਗ ਲਈ ਜਾਵੇ
ਨਹੀਂ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਅਸੀਂ 95 ਚੋਂ ਰਿਟਾਇਰ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਨੇ 95 ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹੁਣ 2024 ਆ ਗਿਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੋਲੇ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਜੋ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਕਹੀ ਜਾਵੇ ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਂ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਹੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਖੂਨ ਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਉੱਠ ਕੇ ਖੜਨਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਐਂਡ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਤੱਕ ਸਹੀ ਮੈਸੇਜ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਉਣਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਕੌਣ ਬੁੱਚਰ ਸੀ ਅਤੇ ਕੌਣ ਗਿਲਟੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਸਿੱਧੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਇਹ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪਹਿਲਗਾਮ ਅਟੈਕ ਹੋਇਆ ਸਾਰਾ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਨੂੰ ਰਿਟੈਲੀਏਟਰੀ ਜਵਾਬ ਦਿਓ ਇਹ ਰਿਟੈਲੀਏਟਰੀ ਜਵਾਬ ਕੀ ਦੇਣਗੇ ਉਹ 4 ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨਗੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨਗੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨਗੇ ਇਹ ਬੰਬ ਸਿੱਟਣਗੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਕੌਣ ਮਰੂਗਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਦਿਓ ਇਹ ਫਿਰ ਬੁੱਚਰ ਬਣਨਗੇ ਔਰ ਫਾਈਟਿੰਗ ਫॉर द ਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਬਣਨਗੇ
I think just jump in whenever you want, guys, but it seems to me that he's got a really big disconnect with the whole introduction or how people of Punjab kind of view him.
Yeah, do you know, with that clip with Simranjit Singh Makkar, the host, who hosts a lot of interviews, very popular YouTube channel that he runs, a lot of people have taken that clip out and celebrated it, like, immediately off the bat, he was really direct with KPS Gill's brother, and it was almost kind of a real kind of victory moment when he's like he has celebrated, right, like ki khatya tusi enniya lanta, right? People are like, wow, he said that to his face. But then his next statement is like, you should ask for an apology, maafi mango Punjab to, and Dickie's response is nay, like straight off the bat, right? And firstly, for me, there's two things. One is the framing of Makkar's whole conversation from the get-go, and you'll notice, everyone who watches this video in full, it's about KPS Gill, it's about Punjab, it's about Shaheeds, who, Dickie Gill calls terrorists. Not once do they use the word Khalistan. That's not even part of the conversation. Makkar's remit is maafi, an apology, and Dickie's response is there should be a legal inquiry. But the conversation isn't about apologies and justice from the Indian state. The conversation is actually about Sikh liberation, our Padshahi, our Azadi, which doesn't even form part of the discussion. And that is, again, why this video is coming out at this point in time. He talks about the Pahalgam attack. This video was released after India and Pakistan have just fought this intense conflict where India's military capabilities, particularly its air force, was exposed as being like really inferior and insufficient against the Pakistan defense. He talks about by Amritpal Singh later in this video, and he talks about a Sikh Hindu unity, and in his opinion, why Muslims are the most communal in India. So he demonizes Muslims. He talks about Sikh Hindu unity. His wife later on is going to talk about her bid of running for an election. So I think the timing of this video is prompted, whether by Indian intelligence agencies, whether people that are involved in handling him or giving these individuals political advice, and we can only speculate on that. But the timing of the video points to they're trying to touch this critical fracture of making Sikhs side with India. And the stuff that he's saying in this video is all about, let's marginalize Khalistan, let's marginalize the Shaheeds. They were nothing, they were just terrorists. Let's celebrate the fact that India is now this democracy that's progressive, that we have law and order. And it's the continual drumbeat of Hindu Sikh Bhaichara, be part of the Indian state. We want development. He talks about like AI and stuff, like, there needs to be development in Punjab and we're missing out. And that's continually been the response from the Indian establishment, from, Indian appointed and backed politicians in Punjab, that leave those dark days of terrorism, their words, that's what they call it, leave those dark days of terrorism behind and become part of, the growing Indian democracy and become part of the nation. And like you said, he's completely disconnected. These guys are Chandigarh elites, completely disconnected from the heartbeat of Sikhi and the Pant in Punjab, and they have their role is as essentially unofficial representatives of the Indian government to do PR on their behalf. I mean, that's what I would say is the point of the video, is to do PR and to
keep the status quo.
100%.
A lot of people have been quite surprised why he's come out and made this interview. He's been quiet for the last 3 or 4 decades, and I think there was one interview he came out about 2 years ago, which was a lot more subtle, but he's come out a lot stronger than this one. And I believe the reason why individuals like him have come out is like Shamshed was saying, that this is part of that elite, the Indian elite that has benefited from the genocide against Sikh. He still has armed protection, which he needs to protect him against the threat that he claims doesn't exist, the Khalistan Sangharsh that he claims is crushed. But they've enriched themselves. There's been countless thousands of Sikhs have died, and these are the kind of families in Punjab who've profited from that. And the reason, and he kind of alludes to that in the interview as well, where he talks about the narrative is starting to change. There's these WhatsApp groups. There's a lot of, obviously, the media is a lot more independent now. And that troubles these people, because when people start to find out more, then people like him come in the crosshairs. Yeah. So that's why I believe he's speaking out, because I think they're starting to get a bit worried about how things are changing. And that's what he spoke about as well. He spoke about how, I think 10, 15 years ago, he went to speak to a senior police officer to say that, look, he spoke about how he saw pictures in Taran Taran of Shaheed Singh, and he's like, they're starting to be, they're
getting rattled.
They're getting rattled.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned, because nowadays, in the age of social media, right? Maybe back in those times, 30 years ago, it wasn't as easy to access this information and to get it out there. And now they're trying to give a different narrative by doing these type of interviews, right? So they're trying to change everything through social media.
And that's why we have to challenge this. And,
exactly.
And we shouldn't be afraid to critique our own media as well. And Makkar is completely out. I'm sure you were saying earlier, he's completely out of his depth. Yeah. And they shouldn't touch these kind of topics, because it does more damage. Because, even like legally, if you ask questions that then someone answers, you end up proving their case.
Yeah.
So I think Makkar falls really short of holding his family to account. He just said there in this opening clip that their family doesn't, not that an apology would suffice, but to say that they have nothing to be apologized for, it's a slap in the face of, and it's a disgrace to all those people who've suffered under the Indian regime.
Now, moving on to the next clip, where he kind of alludes to what you said before about crushing the Khalistan movement. So let's take a look.
ਇੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫਲਾਨੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਟਿਆਲੇ ਵਿਆਹੀ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਓ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ।
ਕੌਣ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ?
ਇਹ ਟੈਰਰਿਸਟ, ਸੋ ਕਾਲਡ ਨਹੀਂ, ਬਲੱਡੀ ਟੈਰਰਿਸਟ। ਐਂਡ ਜੋ KPS ਗਿੱਲ ਕਰ ਗਿਆ, ਅੱਜ ਤੱਕ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਦਿੰਦਾ, ਰਿਕਾਰਡ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰ ਲਿਓ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਟੱਡੀ ਕਰ ਲਿਓ ਇਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ। ਵੀ ਕੈਨ ਹੈਵ ਅ ਸੈਕੰਡ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਔਨ ਦੈਟ। ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਚ ਕਿਤੇ ਟੈਰਰਿਜ਼ਮ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਖਤਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ, ਕੰਟੇਨ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ, ਐਲੀਮੀਨੇਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ। ਦੂਜੀ, ਟੈਰਰਿਜ਼ਮ ਦੀ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡਾ ਮਿਸਕਨਸੈਪਸ਼ਨ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛੋ, ਟੈਰਰਿਜ਼ਮ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਦੋਂ ਹੋਈ? ਟੈਰਰਿਜ਼ਮ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ 78 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਜਦੋਂ ਆਨੰਦ ਕੀਰਤਨੀਏ ਜਥੇ ਦਾ ਭਿੰਡਰਾਲੇ ਨਾਲ ਚੱਕਰ ਪਿਆ। ਮੈਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਕੌਣ ਕੀ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਕੌਣ ਕੀ ਸੀਗਾ। ਦੂਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ KPS ਗਿੱਲ came on scene in 82, came in power in 87. This was not creation of KPS Gill, and he retired in 95. He retired in 95, अपना काम करके वो चला गया।
Yeah, so he doesn't name any names when he talks about terrorists, which is, apart from Sant Jarnail Singh, I think it's the only name that he mentions. He alludes to 1978 Vaisakhi, by Fauja Singh, Huni, and everything that happened there. And his whole position is completely disconnected from the grassroots reality of Punjab. Not in any Gurdwara all over the world will you ever find a picture of KPS Gill, Sumed Saini, Gobind Ram, Indira Gandhi, Beyant Singh, the Chief Minister. But you'll find pictures of Sant Jarnail Singh everywhere. You'll find pictures of Shaheed Singh, Singhnia, Pachangi in every single Gurdwara all over the world pretty much. And that shows you where the Panth sentiments lie. The Akal Takht has, through those crucial moments, through Panthika Gawai, has declared at various different points that these are our Mahan Shaheeds of the Panth. There's Gurdwara Yadgaran built to these individuals. There's no monuments or anything built by the Panth for KPS Gill. His other claim is, KPS Gill completely finished terrorism in Punjab. He served he says that he served from 88 to 95. He served the Indian government. In 1995, Beyant Singh, who's the chief minister, is assassinated by his police officers who were involved in a conspiracy with Khalistan Jathebandiyan in the high security police secretariat in Chandigarh. So Chief Minister of Punjab, the Prime Minister of Punjab, generals of the Indian Army, senior police officers, KPS Gill, wherever he moved in bomb-proof vehicles with a huge number of paramilitary officers for his personal protection. He lived his entire life under what they call Triple Z security, even after his retirement. So if he finished so-called terrorism, if he finished the threat, why is his boss essentially, assassinated in 1995, and then he's put on retirement, put out to pasture, and then he lives his entire life under the threat of death? Because individuals like Vaidya, who's retired and then moved out of Punjab for his role in the invasion of Darbar Sahib, is assassinated outside. So they know Sikhs have a reach, that the Jajaru Jathebandiyan of the time were trying to find retired police officers like Ribeiro in like Romania, outside of Punjab in other states. So his claim, firstly, factually, is completely incorrect, even if we use his terms of like terrorism.
And even he today has security.
Even he has security till this day.
What's the threat? Why do you need security?
What's the threat, right? And we'll come back to that threat point as well, because he talks about it a bit later on about how he perceives the threat. But yeah, I mean his
even this idea that Gill was brought in to do a job, he did that job. Shamshed alluded to it earlier as well, that it was his reputation in Assam of brutalizing protesters. He kicked a young protester to death and got off from the High Court. He was brought in because he was someone with a Sikh face. That they wanted to present that image that this was like an internal thing, Sikhane Apsavich, it's like some sort of civil war or whatever. And the other thing is, it's so that we are left with the image of Gill rather than the larger state behind him. But in this idea that they were brought in, Chief Minister Beyant Singh was dismissed from the Congress government in 1983 in Punjab for actually an extrajudicial killing, which they call false encounters. So he was kicked out of the government at that time because there was a massive controversy, because he had several Sikhs killed, and it wasn't to do with the Sangharish or anything. It was like a personal, private matter or something. But either way, he was kicked out of government. So look at the individuals they've brought in. The Sangharish is at its peak at this point. So they're like, we've got to bring in some of the worst people that we can find who won't. The policy was the government's. Let's be clear about that. The policy was the government's, but who would sell their souls?
These were the puppets.
These were the puppets. These were the people who strings they could pull. But the idea of them having completed this job is false, because Gill is retired in 95 because Beyant Singh was killed, because he's the head of police and his main job as well was to protect the chief minister. So when Beyant Singh was blown up, their partnership essentially also disintegrated along with Beyant Singh. So this idea that he crushed the Khalistan Sangharish is not true.
And when he talks about the destruction of the Sangharish in Punjab, what he calls terrorism, there's a massive increase in police force in Punjab from 75, where there's like 20,000 police officers, to 1994 when there's 70,000 police officers. In Punjab, there's 100 police officers per 100 square kilometers, compared to the national average of 45 police officers per 100 square kilometers. So, he doesn't destroy or defeat anything, because even now, Khalistan is like a massive thing. And it's only grown. The support for Khalistan, the love Sikhs have for Khalistan, it's purchased as an idea. I think it's right now, what I've seen in my life is it's more common, more understood, more accepted by Sikhs completely across the board. And when India commits some kind of, not even atrocity, when they try to undermine Punjab in any way, very quickly that underlying sentiment of Khalistan bubbles to the surface. We saw during the Kisan Morcha, we've seen now, multiple times since then. Anytime there's there's been a big morcha against Biadbi in Punjab, the call jumps very quickly to Sanu Sadi Azadi Chahidiya. Through Punjab's popular culture, diaspora, there's way much more support for Khalistan because there hasn't been that environment of state violence that you see in India. So there's still underlying apprehension, right, to talk about it and support it. But in the diaspora, because there isn't that, there is so much more support. So his
more
claim,
openly,
more openly. Yeah,
and I think it's this allegation of terrorism that he applies to the Kharkus. By Jaswant Singh Jikala, who's also a Shaheed, that's one of his major points when he came out in the West. It wasn't to get the United Nations to do this or the other. It wasn't for justice. It was to speak truth to power, to uncover the real truth about what was happening. And he specifically said to show the world who is the real terrorist and who is the freedom fighter, who is the light and who is the darkness, right? And he was then brutally tortured and killed under the orders of KPS Gill himself. So by Jaswant Singh Jikala's case study is an example of who really was the terrorist.
And maybe could you just, to give some context to viewers who may not have had this before, explain where has this terrorist narrative come from? Why has that come about?
I think the terrorist narrative comes from the Indian state, and it comes to undermine and delegitimize Sikh resistance in Punjab, and particularly the Sikh call for Khalistan and for their Azadi, their Padshahi, their separation from India. So India's always tried to deal with what is essentially an issue that is political in nature. They've always tried to deal with it as a criminal issue. And that's why they always use this language of extremism, terrorism, etc., because it then allows them to apply legislation. It allows them to respond with violence to what they see as a problem.
The world over as well, it's a highly politicized term.
And it kind of galvanizes the other normal population who aren't Sikh or involved in this struggle, right?
And interestingly, when we have had independent people, organizations who look at the violence in Punjab and the Sangharsh, Human Rights Watch published a comprehensive report in 1994 after a fact-finding mission in Punjab. And their quote from this report was, "The price of the government's apparent success," because through Byan Singh and KPS Gill and the operations launched by the Indian government, where most Amritdhari Sikh in general were targeted, it did cause massive casualties and it did cause a slowing down of the movement. But the price of the government's apparent success against a separatist is the legacy of these abuses, a corrupt and brutalized police force whose resort to murder and torture has been sanctioned by the state as an acceptable means of combating political violence. The fundamental purpose of torture appears to be to inflict severe physical and psychological pain in order to destroy the dignity and will of individuals and to repress potential political support. So what Shamsher Singh was saying earlier, that the reason they inflicted that kind of violence against the Sikh population, the Sikh masses in general, was to try to suppress that call for Azadi, and that's why outside of Punjab we're more able to speak about it.
And it was very particular as well, this type of targeting that they were doing. They were targeting Amritdhari young men, they were targeting Naujawan that were involved in any kind of Panthic organizing, they were targeting individuals like Jaswant Singh Khalra and others who were trying to document and report what was happening. And they were monitoring everybody in Punjab, everybody that was involved in any type of Sikh political organizing. And they did this to instill terror. And this is a classic tactic of the state, is to use that type of Orwellian logic and language that the state is using brutal methods. I mean, there's cases where, Sikhs have been tied to jeeps and pulled apart. Baba Harchand Singh. And there are multiple stories of the sexual violence that was inflicted against Amritdhari Bibiyan, the families of Kharkus that were targeted, brutal cases. And torture that defies any sense of humanity and that doesn't make sense to us as Sikh, because we never in our history have Sikhs inflicted that type of violence, even when we've been engaged in battles against whether it's the Mughals or the British or the Indians, right? And we talk about this in the previous podcasts. Is look at our heroes and look at the type of violence that Sikhs were inflicting, targeting police officers, and the Indian state's violence look like brutalized bodies and mass violence targeting civilians. So the state was the one inflicting terror, but they want to turn the tables because it's a war for the state. It's a war of perception. So their soldiers like KPS Gill are, carrying out terror against the people of Punjab and Sikhs. And the Indian state is saying that the Sikhs are the terrorists. And this starts with Indira Gandhi, where she says, in June 1984, when all the tanks and all the troops and everything's set, they've been preparing for over a year to invade Darbar Sahib. And she says, I appeal, shed hatred, don't shed blood. When the entire machinery is geared up towards shedding the blood of the Sikhs, they always want us to look like that we are the irrational ones.
The bad guys.
The bad guys. That fighting for our Raj, Khalistan is something that is ridiculous, it's evil, it's terroristic, that you're not allowed to fight. That if you want something, like Dickie Gill will say time and time again, is go to the courts, let's fight. And Sikhs today, many of them, they appeal to the politicians, to United Nations, say, if we're going to get anything, we're going to get it from the United Nations. But as soon as you pick up that weapon, you arm yourself as Guru Sahib instructed us, then the state uses that language that these are terrorists, that now they've gone outside of the boundaries that were permitted to them. You can do peaceful protest, you get water cannons, you'll get arrested, you'd get tortured in prison by the state, and that's all fine. As soon as you pick up a weapon to defend yourself, then immediately you're the violent, you're irrational, you're a terrorist, and now the state is going to annihilate you. Either you become part of the Indian system, either you assimilate, or you're going to be annihilated. And that's the kind of
logic.
Yeah, the logic that the Indian state is deployed, and that's the pattern that we've been seeing continually. And Dickie Gill, he's drunk the Kool-Aid. Like he's like, bloody terrorist, right? He's bought into it. Yeah, completely. He's completely bought into it. For him,
he needs to as well. Like his whole system depends on it. His whole
kind of
his worldview.
His whole world.
And the people, like, what I found quite interesting when I was watching it is he doesn't name a single name apart from Sant Jarnail Singh when he says terrorist. And who are these people? Like Shaheed Bhai Fauja Singh, Shaheed Jaswant Singh Kalra, Sant Jarnail Singh Pidnarawale, Shaheed Bibi Upkar Kaur. The Panth celebrates them as Gurmukhs, as this is an example of what Gursikhi Jeevan looks like, right? And he doesn't name a single
It shows you their power, though.
He shows their power.
Even 40 years later, about Sant Jarnail Singh, he can't say anything against him.
Yeah.
He goes, I don't like him, but I won't comment on it.
Yeah.
So like they can't. And then at the same time they say, throughout this whole interview, you'll see this contradictory stance of there is no support, they're a minority, they're extremists, but at the same time I can't say anything against him because the whole of Punjab will be upset.
So you guys touched a bit on his KPS Gill's character according to his brother and how he perceives him in one way. And I think the next clip that we go into is going to shed a bit more light on that, on actually how disconnected he is truly. So let's have a look.
ਉਹ ਬੁੱਚਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ
ਮਸੀਹਾ ਸੀ।
ਮਸੀਹਾ ਸੀਗੇ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਡੂ ਯੂ ਨੋ ਵਨ ਥਿੰਗ ਅਬਾਊਟ KPS Gill? KPS Gill ਸਵੇਰੇ 4 ਵਜੇ ਉੱਠਦਾ ਸੀ। ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ ਸੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਆਪ ਪਾਠ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ। ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਡਰਿੰਕ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਜਿੰਨੀ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ ਸੀਗਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਲਾਉਣ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਸ਼ਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਸੰਤੋਖ ਕੇ ਪਾਠ, ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਡਰਿੰਕ ਅੰਦਰ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ। ਟਰੈਵਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ।
The audacity and the ridiculousness of his understanding of Sikhi and his defense of his brother, that he was such a great Sikh that he'd wake up at Amrit Vela and had Prakash in his house and he'd do his part and then he'd drink outside. Never in the house. And afterwards, Sham nu part karke peg bar launda sa. Like, into no Sikh does that make sense at all. But
and there'll be Sikhs watching this thinking, I know I was that. He sounds better than me, right? He gets up at 4 o'clock, he's got Prakash at home, etc., etc. But this is how ridiculous and pathetic attempt that Dickie, even though KPS Gill's whole account is on record about what he thinks about Sikhi. I mean, this is the same person who launched Operation Black Thunder against Darbar Sahib, right, in 88, I believe. So this is why these podcasts are important, because what they're trying to do is rewrite history. They're hoping that the next generation, they're not going to know about these things. They're not going to read these old reports, etc. They're not going to know who KPS Gill is. If you watch this thing for the first time and you've heard of KPS Gill, we don't know much about him, he sounds like a gurmukh. Yeah. Apart from the alcohol, obviously. But what I'm trying to say is he's still trying to, and the reason why he doesn't say he didn't.
Sounds like a misunderstood character.
Yeah, that he's trying, like, you know. But the reason why he had to include the alcohol is because it was such a famous thing about KPS Gill. Human rights activists and lawyers talk about how that he was really just the front of this, and you know his main job was to protect the police officers from persecution or prosecution of any sort. But the main job he would have was that once the army and the other paramilitary forces had an encounter, a legitimate encounter with Karku Singh, is where he would then go and hold a press conference. And they said after the press conference, he was given Ayash Banda Siga. So they said they'd give him alcohol and you know, like take him to brothels, etc., etc. So that's all his job was, just to be the front of this.
And do you think maybe it's a deeper thing that he used to drink so much because he's trying to cover up some guilt or some?
I think there was actually, I remember like there was one of these reports where one of the police officers talked about how in his police station over the last 2 years, he'd seen like 5,000 cases of torture. And he said that those most sadistic people were brought in who, you know, who'd relish in torture. And he said that sometimes a lot of them started off having to heavily drink first, and then afterwards it became normal to them. But yeah, definitely, I think the alcohol would have helped, I don't know, cover like, or I don't know why he drank. I mean, I can't speculate on why he would drink, but
I mean, I think it's probably because KPS Gill was a coward, like, you know, deep down, and he's facing up against Surme, people that are literally putting their lives on the line without, you know, the level of state infrastructure that KPS Gill has, armored vehicles, you know, gunmen following him around openly. He can move around in convoys. You know, Karkus are moving around underground, and you know, it terrifies him and his police force. Like throughout the entire time period when KPS Gill is active, numerous statements are issued by Karku Jathebandiya for him and his police officers, for other police officers like Gobind Ram, that stop torturing and harassing people in villages. Come and meet us. You bring your soldiers, we'll bring ours. Come and meet us and let's deal with this properly, face to face. Ammo samne, let's fight, right, on the Madan Jang. And never once do the police take the challenge. You know, it's famous instances in like by Avtar Singh Brahma Huna's Pind, where the CRPF and these paramilitary forces would continue to camp out, and they had a station there, and they'd commit atrocities in the village and harass the village in order to punish the village for producing someone like Bhai Avtar Singh Brahma, right? To instill that fear in them. And
Dujana koi
utthe, right? And you know, and then Bhai Brahma issued multiple statements and had to leave fighting the larger struggle for Khalistan to go deal with these police officers. And to them, it was one and the same. You know, they're fighting for the people. So they're not going to be like, this is the cost of war, let the, you know, people of Brahmpura suffer. That they were willing to, go there and confront the CRPF, go on the Gurdwaras, loudspeakers, issue direct challenges, and the CRPF don't leave their bunker. You know, these are the type of police officers Gill surrounded themselves with, cowards that were sadistic, that took pleasure in torturing, and they were torturers that were in the Punjab police that they would pull out and they would bring out to
they
torture.
Would promote those. Yeah. And let's not forget that many Punjab police officers who refused were killed. You know, and they were either they're blamed on the Karku Jathebandis, or they would just be part of the dossier of missing Punjabis or Sikh.
Yeah.
And this idea, this justification he's trying to give, this kind of Sikh angle he's giving KPS Gill, is the reason why they chose a person with a Sikh appearance. One of the interviews I was watching recently in the Academic was saying that if the Sikh saw that it was a Brahmin, like the front man, he goes, then it'd be more clearer to them, sade de Brahmin atyachar kar raha hai. But because he has the appearance of a Sikh, we know he's trying to justify him as a Sikh. He's trying to say, oh, Bhat karda Sikh, etc. No one would say that if he was a Brahmin, right? And this idea of him being the Messiah of Punjab, like he saved Punjab, he did for the Indian state.
Yeah.
They were losing their hold, their occupation of Punjab. And individuals like Gill, who sold their soul, sold Sikhi, sold the Punjabi, anything that had any kind of value to them, they sold all of those things out to be part of that regime.
But just on that, like, you know, you're saying he was the Messiah for the Indian government, and he was their super cop because he was able to deliver what they wanted, which was brutality against the Sikhs and the movement. And they rewarded him, right? He receives India's highest civilian honor, the Padma Shri, when, towards the end of his career, he's, given this like title of super cop. He's celebrated till this day. But the Panth doesn't celebrate KPS Gill. The Panth doesn't celebrate a single police officer or a torturer that these individuals promoted and they gave free rein to carry out. But they celebrate by Gurdev Singh Debbu. They celebrate Shaheed by Fauja Singh. They celebrate Shaheed by Anok Singh Babbar. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਵਾਰਾਂ ਪੰਥ ਗਾਉਂਦਾ ਆ, not KPS Gill ਕੇ, ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਸੂਰਮਾ ਸੀਗਾ. KPS Gill ਡਰਪੋਕ ਸੀਗਾ. And like his police officers, they were...
He never fired a single shot.
Yeah.
KPS Gill never fires a single shot during the Sangharsh. And there's one thing that keeps radicking in my mind, when you talk about how he was rolling with like paramilitaries and 100 commandos. It reminds me of this letter or an interview that Lieutenant General Sukhwinder Singh Papugora gave. And in there he said that because of the black cats, the people don't know who the genuine Karakus are and who the government state-sponsored cats are. Mm-hmm. He goes, so we lay at night in the long week. We read Barney, we read history. Mm-hmm. He goes, we don't actually read that much history because now is the time to make history. So it's such a beautiful kind of difference between how they were operating and how the Surma were operating.
And it reminds me of there's a var about Shaheed by Rashmal Singh Chandra,
right.
And like iddan de Surme sige, right? Like Shaheed by Rashmal Singh Chandra, famed commander in the Khalistan struggle. He's arrested and he's tortured, and because he was senior within the leadership, they wanted him to reveal certain information. And look, the spirit and the delivery of Surme like him, he says, I will confess everything, bring KPS Gill to my face, and I'll confess to him. I'm not going to confess to you guys. You guys are low level. I'm a commander. He's your commander. Bring him. So they bring KPS Gill, and Rashpal Singh Chandra spits in his face, knowing full well what he's going to face, already being tortured by these police officers that are using the Sahara of liquor to give them courage, just to torture his body. And Odivich Naam Banida Enna Perasiga, he has so much courage and strength that he knows what he's going to face. And he calls KPS Gill there to spit in his face. Like an Odivarya, like Shaheed by Rashmal Singh Chandra Surma Shaheed Deepa gaya. Like Odiya Vara gai jandiya. And in there you learn the history and the character of our Surme and the character of these
this isn't just us talking about this. It reminds you of a book that was written by a journalist called Amandeep Sandhu. He's not like a practicing Sikh. He's an Indian journalist, and he wrote a book called Punjab: Journey Through the Fault Lines, and very anti-movement, very anti-Sikh really. And he went to some of these areas and was speaking to like different people about the movement and what happened. And he spoke to this Hindu shopkeeper in, I think it would have been Taran area. And he said that your shop is in the outskirts of the village. Wasn't it quite risky to be operating outside, like, at the outskirts of where during the night when obviously the Karakus were roaming the streets, etc., etc. He bought into this, otherwise an intelligent guy, but bought into this propaganda. And the Hindu shopkeeper laughed. He goes, no, because we were under the area of Rashpal Singh Chandra. And he goes, once there were like these kind of like gangs or like these robbers who came to try and he goes, Baisab came himself and said, listen, don't move. You're fully fine. You're fully protected. We've sorted out them. The Karakus had to fight so many people on so many different fronts. There's the CRPF, the Border Security Forces. There's the Communist Party members who had been armed. There was these village panchayats, like all these anti-Sikh elements in Punjab that were armed by the state. And then there's black cats. So like who did they not fight against? So at the same time, they're protecting the Punjab people from criminal elements as well, because obviously there was a complete vacuum. There was no police there, and the police were worse than the criminal elements, right? So, but what this Hindu shopkeeper says is that no, he goes, this was under the Bindrawai Tiger Forces, Lieutenant General by Rashpal Singh Chandra. And the guy was like, the guy was shocked. He goes, okay, because you guys were safe. He goes, of course we were. He goes, in fact, when he was taken by the police, and he goes, they wanted to cremate him and get rid of his body. He goes, all of us from around the area, we surrounded the police officer and we took his body. So those photos that you see of Rashpal Singh Chandra's body and his legs, you can see they're all twisted, like every joint of his legs are broken. The reason we have those photos is because Sikh and Hindu people in that area went and reclaimed his Shahidi Swaroop.
And and that wasn't just a story then, right? Like this is the pattern from the Sikhs. Early on from 78, when Paifauja Singh's arrested, he's arrested and he's released on bail, and he becomes Shaheed on bail for the case of protecting a shopkeeper's daughter who's being abducted by a local daku, a gangster, a criminal, whatever, who take her and assault her and bring her back. And he,
Both were Hindus.
And both were Hindus. And he hears the shopkeeper sees Paifauja Singh and says, Lanta eho Sikh de utte, like, Guru Gobind Singh de Sikh nahi rahe. He challenges he challenges the Sikh, challenges the Bana. When he sees a Singh in Bana, and that's the respect and the character of the Sikh that's instilled in the people of Punjab. And these are the people Dickie Gill is calling a terrorist. These are the people that the police are firing upon. These are the people whose families they're trying to torture and eliminate completely from the ground in Punjab, because they don't want us to have our Azadi or our Raj Khalistan. They want us to be like Dickie Gill. How you do your part in the morning, then you drink your peg
Totally
outside.
subservient to you. The funny thing is, like, people, my non-practicing Sikh friends who have a bit more common sense, if they were ever to drink, they would never dare set foot in a Guru Ghar. So, and not let alone doing Guru Sahib Seva.
But the funny thing is, before this interview came out, I believe it was a rumor in Sikh circles that Gill, that he had Prakash, so that he had like a counterparts happening, because at the same time they were terrified, and they did these things that was completely contradictory. But it's one thing that Shamsher Singh said today, and it's something he said a while back, and it always makes me think about them and us. But ona de kon hero hai, sade kon hero hai. Who are the people who are in the Shaheed Yadgars, in the Guru Kara, and look at the stories of these people, learn about these stories of these people, the Shaheed, the Inadi Jeevaniya, and on the flip side, when Shamsher talked about that Gill was given the president's, that's the Indian president. It's not the Punjab government president or whatever. It's the Indian government's president, right? The president of India. The Police Medal for Gallantry is the highest award you can be given for police. And if you look at just some of the people that were given that award, KPS Gill is one of them. Sumed Singh Saini is another one. Sumed Saini is another one. And Avtar Atwal, who was the Deputy Inspector General of Police, he was assassinated by Singhs in 1983 because he had it was a lot of sexual violence, etc. And he was Sant had him assassinated in 1983, and he was given that award posthumously. So like he was given after he was killed, he was given that award. And then one of the others is Gurmeet Pinky Cat, and this guy came openly, he's died now, didn't get any sort of any sort of legal recourse through the courts or whatever, but he confessed to over 50 false murders of Sikh. So these are the big people that they've given that the Indian state thinks are the best police officers. So that's what we have to remember as well, that although they put Sikh appearance forward, who was the finance minister, the revenue minister, who was putting up crores for bounties for unnamed Sikhs to be assassinated, to be killed? What is the machinery behind this? And we were talking to Shamsher about a couple of days ago, and I said that in previous history, it wasn't the Jalad that we would focus on. It would be the system behind it. And if we think about why people like KPS Gill, they chose that side, it wasn't based on morals or ethics or conscious decision. One of these other individuals, DGP Virk, he came out a number of years ago and confessed that he had still on his books over 300 black cats. And there was an investigation into him, an accidental investigation, which was then dropped, which showed that he had amassed a personal fortune of over 100 crore, which is about 10 to 15 million pounds. And as a police officer, like a low-ranking police officer, he obviously rose through the ranks, but it was completely at odds with his income. So this is why these individuals chose this path, because they were.
Do you know the other insane thing in any other like democracy in the world? If a police officer had even one of these like accusations against them, do you think the government would ever give him this award? No, it'd be thoroughly investigated, right? But why is it kind of the norm where we've got multiple cases and they're getting rewarded?
I mean, KPS Gill, he was convicted of sexual harassment. He's only convicted of sexual harassment because it was a senior ranking police officer. Obviously, there was untold cases of Sikh civilians, but because she was a really high-ranking police officer and she took it all the way, it took years, and he didn't get any custodial sentence, he just paid a fine. But even having a sexual harassment conviction, all his awards were not taken back, even though there's obviously there's a huge outcry by Indian human rights organizations, but that didn't happen. It was one of the reasons why even when he became the president of the Indian Hockey Association, he was banned from traveling to America. I think 50 senators signed a thing to say he shouldn't come because obviously he's a convicted sexual.
But with the British as well, like they do the same thing, and they have done for a long time. And whether they were in Kenya, whether they were in Punjab, whether they were wherever they were, their officers that tortured, that instituted slavery, that protected slaveholders, whatever that they did.
And Punjab police is their legacy.
Yeah, Punjab police is 100% their legacy, and that model of having like India has a Sikh as a police officer who's committing the oppression against you. That's a model that the British created. That they recruited Sikhs from Punjab in order to put them into their police forces, in order to what Baljit Singh was saying is, so the oppressor doesn't you're not fighting against a British soldier, you're fighting against someone who looks like you. It confuses and blurs the line.
And when he goes away, like some people will be talking about this interview and our reaction to it and say, well, he's dead. Like he's gone, the problem's gone. No, that system, those individuals, Ajit Doval, who was the intelligence guy at the time, he's still here. O.P. Sharma, who was the additional DGP, who was really pulling the strings from behind the scenes, they're still in power. A lot of these people have retired and they're walking about, and they're not within our crosshairs. They're not within our scope. But we need to understand that the wider context behind this.
Yeah.
I think let's continue with this.
ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਵਨ ਸਾਈਡਡ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਗੱਲ ਨਿਬੇੜਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ KPS ਗਿੱਲ ਮਾਡਲ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਦੁੱਧ ਉੱਤੇ ਦੀ ਇਹਦਾ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਸਿਰਫ ਤੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੰਪਾਰਸ਼ਲ ਇਨਕੁਆਇਰੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਰਿਟਾਇਰਡ ਜੱਜ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕੋਈ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ, ਸਿਟਿੰਗ ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਕੋਰਟ ਜੱਜ, ਪ੍ਰੈਫਰੇਬਲੀ ਕੋਈ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕੋਰਟ ਦਾ ਜੱਜ ਵੀ ਬੈਠੇ। ਇਹ
ਜਸਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਖਾਲੜਾ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਨੇ ਮਾਰਿਆ?
ਹਾਂਜੀ,
ਜਸਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਖਾਲੜਾ
ਇਹ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਤਾ, ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਮੈਟਰ ਆਫ ਇਨਕੁਆਇਰੀ।
ਇਹ ਹਰ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਇਹ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਅਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੋਣਾ ਨੂੰ KPS ਗਿੱਲ ਨੇ ਚੂਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ। ਹੀ ਵਾਂਟਡ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਅਜਿਹਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਐਲੀਮੀਨੇਟ ਕਰ ਸਕੇ, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਚਿੱਟੇ ਦਿਨ ਐਲੀਮੀਨੇਟ ਕਰਤਾ ਬੰਦਾ।
ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ, ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਹਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਅਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਾਰਿਆ, ਦੈਟ ਇਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਮਾਈ ਨੌਲੇਜ। ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਆਈ ਵਾਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਇੰਟਰਨਲ ਪਾਰਟ ਆਫ ਪੁਲਿਸ, ਐਜ਼ ਅ ਬ੍ਰਦਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਪਤਾ ਹੈਗਾ। ਆਈ ਵਾਜ਼ ਮੋਰ ਆਫ ਅ ਫਾਦਰ ਟੂ ਮੀ ਦੈਨ ਅ ਬ੍ਰਦਰ।
Okay, so he's talking about an inquiry. So what does he mean by this?
He's going to talk about this a lot throughout the video. Like it's his answer to everything. It's his defense. It's like the underlying logic that this issue of terrorism, of who's right or who's wrong, of whether KPS Gill killed XYZ person should be resolved through an independent inquiry. He even talks about like Nuremberg style trials that need to take place. It's complete and utter nonsense. There's been multiple inquiries. Firstly, this is not a legal case. This is a case of our Azadi and our Raj Khalistan. This is not something that can be resolved through Indian courts. The fact that this cannot be resolved through Indian courts, the fact that we've reached the limit of Indian democracy, we've reached the limit of the Indian nation state's power, and we're confronting that power with our own power. Our whole conversation is outside of the entire remit and the scope of the Indian state. That's why we're fighting, right? Where human rights violations are committed by the state when you ask for something that you're not allowed to have. The state says this is the remit. You stay within the so-called parameters of the law, and if you go outside of that, then we're going to annihilate you. We're going to call you a terrorist. We're going to do all this stuff. Our entire struggle is outside the remit of the Indian state. Our entire struggle exists because we don't want to fall under the remit of the Indian state or any other state for that matter. The Sikhs have their own sovereignty that existed before the Indian state was created in 1947. Before the Angrez arrived, Sikhs had their own autonomous sovereign Hond Hasti. We were given this gift by Guru Sahib, our Sache Pacha, given our Padshahi. So his whole understanding is completely flawed. And then on top of that, the Indian state can never ever deliver justice because the Indian state is functioning through KPS Gill, it's functioning through Sameed Saini, it's functioning through promoting, protecting, giving bounties, incentivizing the murder of a Sikh Naujawan. It's investing financial resources into this. There's no differentiation between KPS Gill and the Indian state. It's two sides of the same coin.
He's a product of the same system.
He's a functionary, complete functionary. So there's no.
The other thing as well, this idea that that KPS Gill was all powerful, and or maybe he was just a power to himself, unchecked, reckless. Just it's complete false. About 3 times he's brought in and out of Punjab when it serves them, when it suits them. So like when after Jaswant Singh Kalra, but Shaheed in 95, Byan Singh gets assassinated as well. Then there's a massive uproar internationally because obviously Jaswant Singh Kalra had come outside as well. So internationally, Sikhs were up in arms against Gill because police officers had come forward and testified against KPS Gill that he was responsible for the killing of Jaswant Singh Kalra. Then they took him out again. And
So, sorry, who is this they?
The Indian government. So they choose to when to bring him back and forward. And I hate to be to use these kind of words, but later on, Gill even says in an interview, he goes, we're like condoms. He goes, once they've used us, they'll just discard us. So it shows the real image of what was happening. And this idea about inquiries from Dickie Gill. Gill's had these allegations dogging him his whole career. He celebrated them. I mean, there was a time when he would openly accept it and he would brag about it. He would never mention that for 4 decades. Now that Gill's dead, to come forward and say there should be an inquiry to see if he was guilty or not. And the other thing is, he knows that the reason he's saying this is because the whole Indian state's machinery, its judiciary, its executive, etc., is designed to protect those individuals. In 2001. The Union Home Minister spoke at a function organised by the Hind Samachar Group newspapers at Jalandhar to announce that the government was contemplating steps to provide legal protection and relief to the personnel of the security forces facing prosecution for alleged excesses during the Khalistan Sangharsh.
So what does that mean?
So what they were saying was that they were looking at legal methods to provide complete amnesty. So at this point, in the early 2000s, the cases that families had registered against police officers in the 90s had started to make their way slowly through the lower courts, and they were being thrown out, but the families were continuing, and they were trying to go higher and higher and higher, all the way up to the Supreme Court. So as this wave of cases were coming against just lower ranking police officers, the government stepped in and said that they would be. The Union Minister said a general amnesty and suggested that forces deployed to combat terrorism anywhere in the country must be given special rights and powers. It was clear what that meant. What you remember as well is that a lot of the actions that the Indian security forces took were not illegal. It was the central government that was pushing through legislation like TADA, like the NSA, to make sure that if you wanted to detain someone and torture them, torture is like a standard practice in India anyway, for 2 years without any charge, that was now legal. So they were the ones who were making sure, and that's why some of these police officers like Pinky Cat have come out, because when he had to get dismissed from service because it was all of his crimes that were coming up and catching up to him, that's what they're angry about. When a lot of these police officers speak against the government and testify against their superiors, it's because they maybe have lost their jobs or something. There's some sort of reason for it. Some of them are obviously genuine, their conscience has caught up with them.
The word Billy's looking for, and the legal word that Dickie Gill should also be aware of, is called impunity. And that's what the Indian state is doing. Any police officer is given protection by the state. The murder that they're committing against Sikhs is incentivized. They set up a bounty system where they're giving out cash awards for the police officers killing Sikhs, and then they're protecting them and promoting them for their entire career. So to look to that system for to even use the word justice and legal inquiry in the same sentence, I think is offensive. And it's been a part of Sikh logic for such a long time. And this is the trap that Sant Jarnail Singh with their shahadat has taken us out of. Kitna nu aise system de vichon koi insaf nahi milna. From 1978, what happens with Gurbachana, the Panth follows this legal process all the way through, police officers openly firing at Sikhs. And Sant Jarnail Singh shows through the Tarmiyud Morcha, through the Anandpur Sahib Mata, that you cannot negotiate with the Indian state. And that's why this entire armed struggle kicks off at that point. That's why they invade Darbar Sahib. So for these guys to start with, we need a legal inquiry, is insulting. And for Sikhs to think that's a logical step, it shows how far removed we are from the thought process of Sangharsh and Khalistan and Raj. And then when Dickie Gill uses words like terrorist to describe our Surme, we're letting that narrative and that rhetoric win over. And that's what they're doing. They say something so preposterous, like Fauja Singh is a terrorist, and then they say we should have an inquiry to find out. On one hand, they're committing murder, they're abducting the families of Kharkus, they're committing sexual violence against Amritari Bibia, and on the other hand, they say inquiry honi chahiye. Like, how insulting is that? They're literally hacking bodies apart piece by piece, burning people alive, going into villages, stripping the entire pind naked, and then on top of that, beating everybody.
You've got like neighboring state governments like Rajasthan complaining about the number of bodies that are coming of Singhs, like bound with their hands and their feet, coming through the Ned, that have survived all the animals, etc. Not because they were upset about the genocide against Sikhs, but it was more about like ecological issues, that there's lots of human bodies coming through. So on one hand you've got that, and on the other hand you've got Dickie Gill saying there should be an inquiry.
And in November, like the genocide that happens, we also did a podcast about, they literally treat our burnt bodies, our mutilated corpses as rubbish. And they put them in rubbish trucks. And they say, now, he's saying, he can say with a straight face and a belief and a conviction that an Indian government, independent, sitting Supreme Court judge will deliver us justice. If you believe that, honestly...
Even though like Kalara's case went all the way to the Supreme Court, even though the CBI was ordered to investigate this, that, the other, whilst Gill was alive, he was not even questioned. Even though serving police officers testified, and then they were oppressed themselves and they were like tortured. I think it's
on the human rights as well, right? Like, I used to read so many of these human rights, reports when I was younger, and they were coming out in the 80s, 90s, after, when this stuff's happening. Major physicians for, justice and Amnesty International, and, now when something happens, we're like, everyone's, trying to get Amnesty involved or whatever. Like, these major organizations were writing condemning human rights reports at that time. कोई असर नहीं पिया किसी अदालत दे उत्ते किसी भी दुनिया दे न्याय केंद्र दे उत्ते अदालत दे उत्ते nothing, no impact, no effect whatsoever. So like, for us to have that as part of our understanding and discourse around this, is I don't know.
And the thing is, he says it's fine. Yeah. For him to say it's fine, there's no problem with him saying it. It's preposterous, it's ridiculous, it's pathetic. It's only an issue if we internalize that. If we start saying that's a good idea, and we should have thought of courts. And us, I've got examples here of some of the cases. You got to remember as well, the only time cases have been initiated against police officers is when serving police officers come forward and testify against them. And when we give examples of some of these cases, it's not to provide a critique of the Indian judicial system or to provide something how like it should be reformed, etc., etc. It's just to show how ludicrous the system is, the idea for us to even engage. Because there's one thing, I mean, if you look at other liberation movements, the Irish, they tried different methods, but it wasn't their core strategy. If you can get someone on tax evasion, or if you can do whatever you can do to disrupt. But what I'm trying to say, it wasn't their sole focus. So they had different organizations that didn't represent their liberation movement, that were working on human rights, were working on these different things. But for some reason, especially out in the West, we've made it like the whole thing. And that's what the problem is. So when we bring in some of these cases, it's just to show you the futility of it. So there's a case that's in the courts at the moment. Between 1991 and 1993, a police officer called Satwan Singh Manik witnessed the torture and unlawful killings of 15 people, of 15 young Sikh. And it was only after the killing of a teenager called Kulwant Singh Kanta, who had been detained, tortured, and then executed by police, that it had an effect on him. Why the others didn't, we don't know. But they took this youth to the river, they cut his head off, and they cut his insides open, and he said that they tore through his intestines so he could take on water and his body would drown, right? And what Manik testifies is that they specifically targeted Sikh youth. And if you were a KSC at the start, that was like top of the list. If you had like, Gatra Kapan you had an open data. So these are kind of things. And that's why it's important for people watching this to think. You might think that this is 10, 20, 30 years ago. Why is it important for us? Because if you go into the Insaf website and look at the case studies of 5,000 people, they look like me and you, But we come from different Sampradaya, different Jethebandis, and these are the people who died for us to be involved in those groups today, right? But Manik, he files a petition in 1994 with the High Court. And in 2008, The High Court directed the CBI to investigate the cases. However, in 2013, that's nearly 10 years later, and the case is still pending. A 2-judge bench overturned his decision, dismissing Malik's petition and imposing a fine on him, labeling him a disgruntled employee. The judge said, you should salute the police against the Kharkus, etc. He came with 10 families. He'd given them the final closure of what actually happened to their children. He went with 10 families and the court fined him. During this time, Malik was being arrested, tortured, false charges put on him, and his dad was tortured and murdered as himself. So imagine how he feels, after 20 odd years, he's fighting these cases and they're telling him that you should salute the police. So that's what the legacy of a fight.
Do you know what? I think you can draw parallels to like the Mughal regime, right? Where there's like the Sikh Kalukare happening, there's a price on Sikh's head. And then can you imagine Sikh at that time saying, let's do inquiry, get the Mughals to do inquiry on their own oppression that they're doing? Doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
100%.
And even the Nuremberg example he gives, it wasn't, the Nuremberg trials weren't held by the Nazis, innit?
Let's move on now to the next clip. Dickie Gill talks more about the police's narrative.
To be very frank, have to go on the right track. ਇਹ ਜਿੰਨੇ WhatsApp ਗਰੁੱਪ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਕਹਾਣੀਆਂ ਪਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ, ਕੀ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ, ਤੇ we have to check that. ਇੱਕ ਨੈਰੇਟਿਵ ਹੈਗਾ, ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਨੈਰੇਟਿਵ ਆਇਆ? ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਇਆ. I know police officers who have fought terrorism but are not ready to speak a word against terrorism. ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਛੱਡੋ, ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਨਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ. ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ, ਮੇਰੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ.
This is, again, it's like one of his underlying contradictions that surfaces again and again because of his fundamental disconnect with Punjab and the Pant and what the heartbeat of the Pant is and how it beats for Israj and the pyar that it has for its Surme, right? So on one hand, he's saying that, these police officers have fought, and then he's saying, Sadde ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ. Who? The people of Punjab. So you're a police officer that's celebrated, that's been given a promotion, that's been given awards or whatever, and you are supposedly, according to these guys, are morally in the right. And if you're like KPS Gill, you're a religious guy as well. And then you can't speak against the terrorists that you fought against because the people are going to be against you. Doesn't that say then the people support the terrorists that you're fighting? Like logically speaking, right? And what he's saying on narrative, that's what he's doing. He's somebody who's been isolated, protected by his, elder brother who is like a father to him, KPS Gill, and he's living in this delusional, sheltered world. He's putting out everything that he's saying in this entire video is Indian government propaganda talking points that are repeated from ministers to low-level police officers to the relatives of the police officers like Dickie Gill. This is what the Indian state and its police forces have been doing consistently. The word terrorist, like where we begin some of this conversation, this is narrative building, demonization, criminalization, to marginalize our Kharkus and our Shaheeds, continually calling them terrorists.
And I think as well, like after 4 decades, he could have given an interview to anyone, but he chose Makkar. He chose Makkar because all of these points that he's making are going unchecked.
And the Indian state is not just the police, right, putting out a narrative. It's the judiciary, as Baljeet Singh's talking about. It's the media. It's the academia. It's the security services. It's the civil service. It's every part of this Nazi regime that is putting out its, truth, its Orwellian truth that this, up is down and down is up, right? Like, Sur mein Gursikh, Shaheed Singh, Singhnia are terrorists and their killers are heroes. This whole thing is narrative, even till this day.
But that's why, in terms of the disconnect, that's why he's trying to make Gill look and sound more like the Kharkus themselves.
Make him sound like a Sikh.
Yeah. Or Tadesi or Namjab Tadesi.
Humanize.
Yeah. But he's trying to give them those qualities that he knows that the Sikh
values.
Yeah. And even this idea of Gill being a messiah, Shamshed and Karnavir, you guys have both kind of destroyed this argument of how contradictory it is. And it isn't lost on Sikh. Sikh can't be fooled by these simple talking points. We view Gill the same way we view Bra. ਜਿਹੜੇ ਚੜ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਤੋਂ ਭੇਜੇ ਗਏ ਸੀ, like we view Bra the same way we view Gill.
And just moving on now to the next clip where he says an interesting point about an Akali leader.
ਫੈਮਿਲੀਜ਼ ਕੋਲ ਗਏ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਅਕਾਲੀਆਂ ਕੋਲ ਗਏ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਅੰਗੂਠਾ ਵੱਢ ਕੇ ਲੈ ਜਾਓ, ਅਸੀਂ ਵੋਟ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਪਾਵਾਂਗੇ. ਇੱਕ ਬੜਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਲੀਡਰ ਹੈ, ਵੋਟ ਨਹੀਂ, ਲੋੜ ਪੈ ਗਈ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਵੀ ਲੈ ਲੂੰਗਾ. ਐਂਡ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਨਾਮ ਲਊਂਗਾ ਨਾ, ਮੈਂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ 'ਤੇ ਹੱਥ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਨਾਮ ਲਊਂਗਾ. ਮੈਂ ਅੱਜ ਨਾਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੈਂਦਾ. ਮੈਂ ਕਿੱਸਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਦਿੰਦਾ. ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਬੜਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਲੀਡਰ ਨੇ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲੀ ਬੁਲਾਇਆ ਮਿਲਣ ਤੋਂ। ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੋਈ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਲਿਖੀ ਸੀ, ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ। ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਜੀ ਦੇਖੋ ਗਿੱਲ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਜੋ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਲਿਖ ਲੈਣ, ਜੋ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਕਹਿ ਦੇਣ, ਹਾਂ, ਬੜੀ ਤਹੱਮਲ ਮਜ਼ਾਜੀ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲਾ ਬੰਦਾ। ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਨਾ, ਗਿੱਲ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਆਨ ਬਾਨ ਸ਼ਾਨ 'ਚ ਕੋਈ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਊਗਾ। ਹੁਕਮ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਬਜਾਇਆ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਉਹ DGP ਸੀਗੇ, ਪਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਜਬੂਰੀ ਹੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੱਕ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੋਲ ਸਕਦੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਉਲਟ ਬੋਲਨੇ। ਜੇ ਅੱਜ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਕੁਰਸੀ 'ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੈਠੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਹਾਂ, ਦੋ ਸ਼ਖਸੀਅਤਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਹਾਂ, ਇੱਕ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਤੇ ਦੂਜਾ KPS Gill।
So he's saying like some Akali leader is, praising KPS Gill so highly that he's saying, I'm in my position because of one hand Waheguru and the other hand KPS Gill. I mean, it just goes to the heart of the contradiction that it's, this vacuum of sense that exists inside Dickie Gill's brain, that he can put KPS Gill on the same platform as Akal Purkh Waheguru, and he talks about it later when he talks about these Akali leaders that have never come forward publicly, and we can speculate that it's probably individuals like Prakash Singh Badal who promoted people like Azhar Alam, who was in charge of like the Alam Sena. He had his own private army of government killers called Black Cat. So it's probably individuals like him, but we can only speculate that who he's referring to, and that wouldn't be surprising because every single leader in Punjab from the Akalis from this period when Sikhs are openly fighting against the state, and even some before, only those individuals that are aligned with the Delhi state have the backing to become the chief minister in Punjab, and we've seen it. So it doesn't matter which party they're from, whether they're Akalis or whatever. He's trying to draw again this legitimacy that Sikhs support us, right? Like KPS Gill, finished terrorists, and the top political person in Punjab supports us so much, but he can't say it publicly. He just like the police officer can't talk about the terrorists he killed publicly, can't talk against them publicly, but privately they will. But at the same time, he's saying all the terrorism is finished.
So the next clip is an interesting one where another contradiction kind of comes up.
ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਮੰਨਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਨਾ, ਫਿਰ ਜਿੱਥੇ KPS Gill ਗਲਤ ਨੇ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਤੋਂ ਆ ਗਲਤੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ।
ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਮੱਕੜ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਮੈਂ
ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਨੋਸੈਂਟ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਵੀ ਇਨੋਸੈਂਟ ਕਿਲਿੰਗ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ, ਬੋਥ ਆਫ ਯੂ, ਕੀ ਡੂ ਯੂ ਬਿਲੀਵ ਇੱਕ ਵੀ ਇਨੋਸੈਂਟ ਕਿਲਿੰਗ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਇਨੋਸੈਂਟ ਕਿਲਿੰਗ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ, ਬਟ ਦੈਨ ਇਟ ਇਜ਼ ਸਮਥਿੰਗ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ। ਡੈਲੀਬਰੇਟ ਇਨੋਸੈਂਟ ਕਿਲਿੰਗ ਔਰ ਐਕਸੀਡੈਂਟਲ ਇਨੋਸੈਂਟ ਕਿਲਿੰਗ, ਜੇ ਹੋਈ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਐਕਸੀਡੈਂਟਲ ਹੋਈ,
ਡੈਲੀਬਰੇਟ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ।
ਡੈਲੀਬਰੇਟ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ।
ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਕੌਂਕੇ ਨੂੰ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਸ਼ਰੇਆਮ ਮਾਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਡੈਲੀਬਰੇਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ।
ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਕੌਂਕੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ, ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਦਾ ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਸੀਗਾ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਸੀਗਾ ਸਨਮਾਨਿਤ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਪਰ ਉਹਦੀ ਪਿਛੋਕੜ ਦੇਖ ਲਓ, ਕਿਹੜੇ ਹਾਲਾਤ 'ਚ ਉਹ ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਬਣਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਕੀ ਕਰਦਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਇਨਕੁਆਇਰੀ ਬਿਠਾਓ।
ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਮਾਰ ਦਿਓਗੇ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ?
ਨਹੀਂ, ਮਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਵਾਂਗੇ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ।
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਸਟੀਫਾਈ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ। ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਦਾ ਪਿਛੋਕੜ ਸੀਗਾ, ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਬਾਏ ਕਰ ਲੈਣਾ, ਕੋਈ ਪਿਛੋਕੜ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ, ਤਾਂ ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਇਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਜਾਊਗਾ? ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਸਰ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ KPS Gill ਗਲਤ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੋਰਸ ਆਫ ਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਲਾਅ ਦਾ, ਉਹ ਜਾਓ ਅਦਾਲਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ,
ਉਹ ਕੌਂਕੇ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਲੱਗਦਾ,
ਪ੍ਰੋਸੀਕਿਊਟ ਕਰ ਦਿਓ, ਉਹ
ਕਰੋ। ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ
ਫਿਰ ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਕੌਂਕੇ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਇਸੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ, ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਕਿਉਂ?
ਇਹ ਹੁਣ ਕੀ ਪਤਾ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਾਰਿਆ। ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਅ ਮੈਟਰ ਆਫ ਦ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ। ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਵਾਟ ਆਈ ਸੇ ਕਿ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੋਣੀਆਂ ਚਾਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਵਿਦਆਊਟ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਗਿਲਟੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ।
And then he's going to say inquiry karo, right? So I mean, a couple of points here. So firstly, he says, no innocent was killed, and if by any chance any innocent was killed, it was an accidental killing, right? So Insaf has documented 5,298 cases that they call enforced extrajudicial murders. These are state-sponsored killings. They're fully backed by the Indian law and its security forces, which isn't separate from its legal machinery. So let's just say those 5,298 have been given this value of innocence, right? They're not the terrorists, they're not the Kharkus, they're just innocent. So you're saying 5,298, just that one organization's documented work, that many accidental killings happen in Punjab, and those in border areas. And when you actually look into who these individuals were, family members of Kharkus. So there's a clear pattern here that the state was systematically targeting. And it wasn't just KPS Gill, it was his predecessors, his successors, like Sumedh Saini, the pattern continues from the police as a infrastructure, the paramilitary forces that were put in, the army. The exact pattern is occurring, throughout different branches of the Indian state. And then, and when he talks about Jathedar by Gurdev Singh Konke, he says, look at his background, right? He said he was an innocent. Look at his background. What is his background? That he supported the Panth, that he supported the struggle for Khalistan, that the Panth appointed him as the Jathedar in those crucial time periods. Bhai Gurdev Singh Konke da jeevan dekho ke ho jasega. And he's saying, look at his background. So for him,
What does he mean by that then?
he means the guilt, the quality of Gurdev Singh Konke not being innocent is the fact that he was associated with the terrorists. And he supported that, right?
And the thing is, he knows that thousands of Sikh Naujawan were brutally murdered and tortured and killed. But what he's saying there, because he doesn't want to openly accept that, and that's his position. It's the government position that these things never took place. KPS Gill's on record of saying that there was not been a single human rights violation because it was the most humane counterinsurgency that's ever been in the world. So he has to maintain that line.
It's very like Trump-like, like it's fake news and just.
The thing is, that's how false and how wrong it was, and they have to maintain this line, because if you take one, if he was to say KPS Gill was a mass murdering, sadistic, state-sponsored terrorist, then their whole thing starts to fold. But even in the example of Jathedar Gurdev Singh Konke, there's Ram Narayan Kumar. He was a human rights activist in Punjab. He's documented hundreds of these extrajudicial murders, these murders of Sikh, and one of those cases was of Jathedar Gurdev Singh Konke. He interviewed police officers who witnessed and testified about what had happened. That Pinky Cat, he's come out openly and gave the same account about what happened to Jathedar Gurdev Singh. So these are fully
Documented
by
the
cases,
state,
by the state
themselves.
And yet he has the audacity, which is why he rolls around with armed guards, and that's why he will speak to Makkar and not anyone else.
And then Makkar later on says as like a counter, right? Like, okay. And so for the point I was
mentioned as well was that, whilst he can't admit to this or the other, what he's saying in a thinly veiled way is, look at his Peshawar. What he's saying is that there is a justification for brutal torture and murder in Punjab under the Indian occupation, is if you are aligned with
And
the
even
Khalsa.
if he is a Jathedar,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. And it's this quality of innocent, right, that is given, and we Sikhs will use it as well in the diaspora, right? You're innocent. That means you're not guilty of being associated to the Khalistanis, and that is something that we need to question and challenge, this notion of innocence, that only those that were not affiliated with Khalistan, their killings are somehow bad, and those Surme, Jajarus, their families, those killings are okay because that was done in the name of suppressing terrorism. So we should be really clear that it's not the quality of innocence that makes the killing egregious for the Sikh. It's their alignment to the Khalistan cause, and then targeting of civilians in Punjab is a separate but related issue. This Indian state targeted civilians in order to collectively punish Punjab for Sikh resistance. And it targeted Kharkus and their families in order to punish the Kharkus and bring them out of the field and make them surrender, to send messages out there to the armed people of Punjab that if you join the Khalistanis, that this is what will happen to you. So when they're talking about innocence, it is actually really insidious and violent language that they're using that to create this category of separation.
For them, KPS Gill is innocent.
For them, KPS Gill is innocent. He's a super cop. And then Makkar will later on make this point that chalo, let's put the Khalistanis aside. He didn't say it directly like this, but the point he makes is, what about the families? What about the families of the Kharkus? What about their killing? And was that not wrong? They were blanketly mass murdering Sikhs at this point.
Okay, so by Jatana's family.
By Jatana's family, man. They went in order to target by Jatana, they went into his pen and they murdered his whole family, including little kids. burnt his house down to the ground. And there were multiple stories where the level of excess committed by the state, they say, Punjabi de muhavra, like, pani sir to nang gaya. Like, this is past the limit of tolerance for us. As apne azadi de la rahe hain, and you guys are burning little kids, man. Like, what?
And that's why when Dickie Gill talks about that they had attacks on them, this is why that took place. And it was after written publications by Jathebandis who wrote to the police officers and said, listen, our fight isn't with you guys, with you low level ranking police officers. It's with the commanders. It's with the state. And after these atrocities didn't stop, then individuals like Dickie Gill did come under fire as well.
And if you look at two of the biggest actions of the movement, the assassination of Indira Gandhi and the assassination of Chief Minister Beyant Singh, those are not possible without Sikhs that were serving within the Indian security infrastructure, realizing what the struggle was and them siding with the Panth versus the Indian state.
There's one thing I wanted to say about Jathedar Konke as well, is that he was one of the only overground Sikh political leaders. So he wasn't within an armed Jathebandi. He was just apne pind vich rahe sige, just normally. And one of the interviews that Ram Narayan Kumar had with the serving SSP, he spoke about how they would repeatedly abduct him.
He'd been arrested multiple
and it wasn't
times,
abducted, they would arrest him multiple times because he'd be in his pen.
Yeah.
And whenever they would be upset about like an action,
While he's Jathedar.
yeah,
While he did that, and when he was arrested multiple times. When he was arrested for that final time, he had just come back from a Smagam program. The whole Pind saw him be arrested. And then, for him to say that, you should do inquiry and find out who killed him. When there is an inquiry, when there's been, there's an account of the police officer who says that his belt, like Jathedar Konke, this is the official story from the police officers, that Jathedar Konke was tied to a police officer. So they accept that he's in custody. He's tied to the police officer's belt. And the police officer, at that day, for some reason, had lost his police regulation issue belt and was wearing his own private belt, which was from home. So it wasn't a standard police belt. That because he was wearing his own belt, Konke was able to break that belt and then run and escape. And then he was shot and he was killed. That's what happened to Konke.
it was such a farce that in court, the lawyers for Singhs would urge the judge to shackle them. They would say that from this hearing, can you order for the prisoner to be shackled? If they were traveling from Taharja, from Delhi to Punjab, the only thing the lawyer would say, wouldn't ask for bail, he wouldn't ask for medical examinations because that never happened either. They would say, could you please shackle them? Because they're going to say he tried to escape. And it was such a common thing that the only thing that the lawyers would argue for is, could you please shackle my client? So that if he's shackled, like in the legs, the whole get up, that then they can't claim that he ran away.
And this account is from senior police officer who was, which was classified and which was released publicly recently, that the Indian state had carried out for its own purposes. So for him to at this point be like, oh no, inquiry karo, like, it's insulting. It's insulting to the people of Punjab that he's claiming that, KPS Gill's spirit, spoke on behalf, that he's speaking on behalf, that he understands
that
better,
he's a part of us.
He's part of India. He's not part of Punjab.
Exactly. He can't walk the streets with armed Punjabi. He can't go to the village of Konke and say these things. One of the accounts that the SSP gave to Ram Narayan Kumar under anonymity was that when he saw Bhai Sahib Saroop, he said that it was obvious that his legs had been ripped up at extreme angles. His hands must have been tied to the back. 2 persons must have got hold of one leg and 2 more the other leg. They must have pulled them and ripped him open in the same way as we break a chicken by pulling its legs. That explained the profusion of blood on the floor. He must have died under horrible pain. So, and again, all of these Sakya only reminds me of what you said about look at their heroes and look at ours. Like, can you imagine that Jathedar Konke, after having to undergo this kind of torture, would then go back to his pind and stay the Jathedar of the Gal Takht and stay defiant and aligned with the Khalistan Sangharsh.
Moving on now to the next clip. You mentioned it before a bit about black hats. Let's hear what Dickie Gill's perspective is on this.
ਜੇ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲੇ ਗਲਤ ਨੇ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਾਲੇ ਦੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਗਲਤ
ਡੂ ਯੂ ਐਗਰੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਹੋ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ
ਕੀ
ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਪਲਾਂਟ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ
ਨਹੀਂ
ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਪਲਾਂਟ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ, ਸਟੇਟ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਪਲਾਂਟ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿਲੀਟੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਰੂਪ ਚ ਆਏ।
ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਨਦਾ
ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਇਨੋਸੈਂਟ ਕਿਲਿੰਗਸ ਹੋਈਆਂ, ਪਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਕਿ ਪਿੰਕੀ ਕੈਟ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕੀਤਾ। ਪਿੰਕੀ ਕੈਟ ਇੱਕ ਸੀਨੀਅਰ ਜਰਨਲਿਸਟ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ, ਬਾਅਦ ਚ MLA ਵੀ ਬਣਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਰਗੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਕੈਟ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ, ਸਟੇਟ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਮਿਲੀਟੈਂਟ ਗਰੁੱਪਸ ਆਪ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕੀਤੇ ਤੇ ਇਨੋਸੈਂਟ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਿਆ। ਉਹਦੇ ਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜੈਨੂਇਨਲੀ ਲੜ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਕਾਜ਼ ਲਈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਕਸੂਰ ਸੀ?
ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਚੱਕਰ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਰਨਲਿਸਟ ਜੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਦਿੱਤੀ, ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਦੀ ਗਲਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਵਾਈ ਡਿਡਨਟ ਦੇ ਟਰਾਈ ਹਿਮ, they should have taken him to the court or for the commission.
So here he's talking about Gurmeet Pinky. He was an infamous cat who came out recently and disclosed untold about 50 cases of murders of Sikh that were illegally abducted, tortured brutally, and murdered. He also testified about the case of by Jatana's family that Sumer Seni had a bomb attack on him. There was an assassination attempt by the Karakus. Again, look at the difference between the rules of war, the
Can
engagement.
you just clarify what is a black cat?
So the black cats were essentially an underground paramilitary force that every SSP in Punjab was ordered to form. And they consisted of like criminal elements. They were made to grow their case and dress up as Singhs. And they committed atrocities across Punjab.
And if there was already so many other like paramilitary forces, why did they need to make a new one?
So there's two reasons for that. One is that the security forces had immunity to commit certain actions, right? Detain, torture, and execute. And then they would get rid of the bodies. But some of the other actions, including sexual violence against Sikh Bibia, meant that those officers would become identified and then eliminated by Sikh militants, right? The Jujaris would then take them out. And one of the cases was Gobind Ram, SSP Gobind Ram, I think it's by Jugraj Singh Tufan, then assassinates him. So where those kind of individuals became highlighted, they would then get targeted. So one of the reasons was that the police, although there's the CRPF, the BSF, the Indian Army, and the Punjab Armed Police and the Punjab Standard Police, even though there was Shamsher talked about 75,000, the number had tripled to 75,000. Even though under Operation Rakshak there was 150,000 additional Indian troops brought into Punjab, they still needed a separate force because the Indian Army had like massive. Like they had been also were disgraced during the operations of Blue Star and Woodrow's in 84 themselves. So what they wanted is a separate force to then commit these kind of atrocities, and the key reason was so that it could be then attributed to the Karakus. That was the main thing. So even though they had like an overwhelming security forces already in Punjab, they wanted a security force that could commit these kind of covert operation essentially, right?
Yeah.
And then that would get blamed against the Karakus.
And how would these function, these black cats?
Well, one of the ways was when Sumer Seni had a bomb attack on him, the Khalistan Liberation Force detonated a huge bomb of RDX along a path where he was traveling. It attacked his convoy, and I think several of his kind of armed kind of guards were killed. He was injured, but he didn't die. And in anger, he believed that it was the Babur Khalsa that did that. And in that area, I think it was Ludhiana, in that area, one of the most prominent Karakus in the Babur Khalsa was by Balwinder Singh Jatana. So he, in his anger, said that it must have been him. Go and target his family. So then, and this is what Gurmeet Pinky Cat talks about. He goes, I was given the order. And it's documented as well that the police went to the house. They took down all the details of who stayed there, the ages and everything. And then Pinky Cat says, before I could get there, I was told that no, Bulla Nang, Ajit Bulla, infamous black cat, he goes, he's been sent. And then basically Bulla went there that same night and they shot everyone dead. And they burned the house down. And this is what's really interesting as well, is that even though they tried to create this wedge between the Karakus and the people, it didn't work. The people knew that it wasn't the Karakus, right? And Bulla even leaves a note behind and saying that this is the action of a certain Jathebandi. So they tried to, and another one of Jatana's brothers was shot dead randomly in a marketplace. And his family talk about Pinky Cat, basically, he confessed to why that happened. And until then, the family didn't know why his brother was randomly shot in a marketplace. And the reason was they were trying to create inter-Jathebandi conflict.
Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer, essentially. So, and even though that Bulla leaves this note to say that, oh, it's this Khalistan Jathebandi at the Borg. I think the Jathebandi who it was blamed against or whatever, they came and the family said, obviously we knew it was new. So although the people of Punjab till this day, despite all the media, all the propaganda, the black cats and etc., they never ever broke their trust. But what it did do is at night when the Karakus were moving around and they were knocking on doors to say, can we stay here? The people didn't know if that person with the Safa, if that was the KCF or if this was the Alam Sena. And again, we've mentioned this before, but this isn't unknown to the world. So the Western world.
This tactic.
This tactic. I mean,
They learned it from Mossad in Israel. Yeah.
They learned it from Mossad in Israel, and it was the U.S. State Department in one of their WikiLeaks cables where they talked about the ADGP. Izhar Alam, who was given a ticket to run in the Akali Dal party, which again it shows about how all the political parties in India are basically part of the Indian system, and we can never seek kind of justice or a resolution of any of our issues through that. But he had assembled a large personal paramilitary force of approximately 150 men known as Black Cats or Alam Sena. So that was at that time SSP Izhar Alam's force. And that the group had reached throughout the Punjab and is alleged to have had carte blanche in carrying out possibly thousands of stage encounters. That is a euphemism for just executions. And Gill publicly praised this group and said the Punjab police could not have functioned without them.
And going back to this point of narrative, the image of the Karku that's popularized in Indian media, films, etc., is that of the black cat, is of the Karku coming in and you let them into the house because you're a trusting villager in Punjab and they come into your house and they commit atrocities. So when he's talking about narrative, the police never put their narrative out. They don't, they did in their statements, etc. But also they don't need to because they got the entire machinery of the Indian state putting their narrative out. Literally taking the villain, one of the worst villains of the story, and turning them into the Karku. And they even recently, there was a couple of years ago, The Cat on Netflix, one of the most high budget productions ever to come out of Punjab, with some of the best direction and cinematography, and it's called Cat. And the story is that the cat is the good guy. And in that film, who's the bad guy? The Karku, has this really complicated backstory and is a really complex character, is the cat. And who is, committing violence for the sake of violence. And, literally there's a line in that series, it's on Netflix, where, one of the guys says, one of the, I think it's a police officer or somebody says, the terrorist, well, they're a terrorist because they're a terrorist and they commit violence because that's what a terrorist does. So the terrorist is like this flat character, has no, complexity, no nuance, no vision, no nothing, and is just, senseless. And the cat literally is, and in that series, the villain is essentially Punjab itself. It presents, and the rescuer and the hero is the administration of Delhi. That's where the serious, uncorrupt police officers come from. Punjab's corrupt from the villager all the way up to the, the chief minister. Everybody's corrupt in Punjab.
When this Bashara was talking about, there was no narrative on the form of the police. When you've got what looks to be across all of the SSP, about 500 to 600 armed criminals who you've dressed up as Singhs, committing rapes and murder and looting across Punjab. What do you think that was? That was them trying to drive that wedge, like I was saying, between them and the Karkus.
And people like Fulla was a sadist. He liked burning people and setting them on fire, and that was essentially his calling card. That's how he would let people know. And then eventually Fulla meets his demise in a jail cell where two Naujwan of Punjab, I don't know what case they were.
It was criminal cases.
They're just standard criminal case, and they find out that the guy, because once they used them, they discarded individual, Fulla became uncontrollable, put into prison, and these two young prisoners, they set him on fire in his cell. And when they're talking about narrative and the sentiment of Punjab and where it lies, etc., Fulla is viewed as a villain even amongst those that Indian society deems are criminals and puts him in prison. Fulla wasn't safe inside a prison cell, and the DGP of Punjab police wasn't safe inside his own home. And they're talking about they've destroyed the threat.
You're talking about the Messiah of Punjab. KPS Gill until his last days had to live outside of Punjab under Z security. There was about 4 or 5 assassination attempts even in his retirement.
And just very simply, they use this as a propaganda tool on a national, even international level. So like most of the arguments you see from people are like, oh, but the Kharkus did this. And it's because they use these.
How effective that narrative is, right?
I mean,
Cultural
Shamsher's
production.
talking about a Netflix series.
That's how invested they are in this, and that the thing is, even I've like heard those, and I'm sure everyone here has heard those. People are listening probably heard people say stuff like that. The Kharkus weren't all innocent. They did this, they did that, right? And some of those may have come from families that had suffered at the hands of black cats. Others may have come from rumors of people hearing this, but it shows how invested the Indian state is, and even then, it's those types of comments are said with an air of uncertainty. But when people are praising Sant Jarnail Singh or the Shaheeds, there is no ambiguity of the character of the Sikhs. And just like there's no ambiguity within the Panth about the character of individuals like KPS Gill.
And at the highest level, I think Maloy Krishna Dar, an intelligence operative, an Indian intelligence operative, they're fully disclosed about how they set up armed groups in Punjab to try to wrestle control away from like the Panthi committee and other and legitimate Kharku Jathebandis. It's not rumor, it's not hearsay. They've documented it themselves. And the amazing thing is that even though they've been trying for 4 decades to do this propaganda and this narrative, it hasn't worked.
And you said that this Pinky came forward, the black cat. Was there any consequence from that?
Absolutely none. He died. He just died. He died a few years later of a heart attack. But essentially, he came for. You can Google him. Gurmeet Singh, Pinky Cat, and there's like exposés where he's done interviews and he's documented how he killed this person, how he killed that person, how Samir Saini was involved in this one, how KPS Gill did this. Everything is fully documented because he became disgruntled with the police and he had a bone to pick with them. Essentially, what happened was he had killed a youth. I think in 2000 there was like a property dispute of Tar Singh. He shot him dead. And you can't. It's harder for them to do these things in this day and age. So that when he went to court, he was furious. Like, what are you talking about? How am I going to go to court? And this is what we do in it.
He thought he had immunity.
He thought he still had immunity, and it was kind of catching up with him. And he still got released. He still got released, and the cases and the charges were dropped, etc. But the point is very, very few and far between cases where they come forward and for some reason, or for some attack of conscience or whatever, these things are exposed. But when they do, even though Dickie Gill is saying there should be inquiry, they should have been he's confessing to all of these murders and nothing's done.
So now moving on to the next clip where he talks about public support and politician support. So it'll be interesting to see.
ਹੁਣ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਔਰ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਿੱਧੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਸਿਕਿਉਰਿਟੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੈਣੀ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਗੋਲੀਆਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਚੱਲੀਆਂ, ਥ੍ਰੈਟਸ ਰਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ ਗਿੱਲ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਓਪਨਲੀ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂ KPS ਗਿੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਖੜ ਕੇ ਬਹੁਤ
ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿਣ
ਬਹੁਤ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਦਿੱਤੀ।
ਮੈਨੂੰ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਲੀਡਰ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਸੀ ਜਿਹਦੀ ਮੈਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਰੈਫਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ ਰਿਣੀ ਆ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ 2 ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਦਾ, ਇੱਕ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਦਾ, ਦੂਜਾ KPS ਗਿੱਲ ਦਾ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਮੈਂ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੈਗਾ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਂ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦਾ, ਮੈਂ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੋਂ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਨਾ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕੱਲ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦਾੜੀਆਂ ਫੜ ਕੇ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੋਂ ਲਾ ਦੇਣਗੇ,
ਪਾਰਟੀ ਡਿਸੋਲਵ ਹੋ ਜੂ, ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਹੋ ਜੂ,
ਖਤਮ ਹੋ ਜੂਗੀ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਬਿਕੋਜ਼ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੋਟਾਂ ਚਾਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ।
So he's saying that again, there's this claim that he makes that the Akali, some really prominent Akali leader, is so supportive that, but he can't publicly say it. And then, Makkar asks him, why can't he publicly say it? He said, because if he does, he'll be grabbed by his beard and he'd be pulled off the stage. And then Dickie's wife says, the party would be dissolved. And Makkar's asking why. She's saying, the party would be dissolved and, because it's of votes. So on one hand, the public supports you so much, and on the other hand, the Akali leaders, the Akali party would dissolve, and the people would not vote for you. Again, showing that the people's sentiments and their support lies with the movement, not with KPS Gill. Somebody who's held as a hero by Delhi, and people are treating Delhi's heroes the way Delhi's heroes have always been treated by Sikhs.
And the reason why the party would be dissolved is because no Panthic political party could exist under the Indian state's framework. That's another delusion that we need to get out of. Every time any kind of Akali government has come in and tried to bring any sort of measures which were remotely pro-Sikh, the government's been dissolved. The Indian state has the power under the president's rule to dissolve the state government, which they've done countlessly in Kashmir and in Punjab.
And when Sikhs elect, or not elect because when Sikhs select the Jathedar of the Akal Takht that's aligned with Panthic sentiments like Jathedar Bhai Gurdev Singh Ji Konke, Jathedar Baba Gurbachan Singh Ji Manochal, the Indian state targets them for murder and elimination. So it shows that the Indian state, whether it's any party that's bound to the Indian electoral system or even the Sikhs' own sovereign institutions, they don't want any leadership that's emerging that's sympathetic to Sikhs or their cause. And I mean, Dickey is delusional if he thinks that any Akali leader could publicly praise KPS Gill and condemn Sant Jarnail Singh. It's just it can't happen because the public sentiment is with Sant Jarnail Singh, the Khalistan movement, as demonstrated with Amritpal, whatever your views are on Amritpal or, how that whole thing's played out. Amritpal was vocal on Khalistan and tapped into that underlying Sikh sentiment for Khalistan and for an Indian election and got elected as an Indian MP based on the public's support for Khalistan on one of the largest vote margins of any election, any Indian election within Punjab. And and he's still in prison. And even though he was given permission by the superintendent of the prison to fight that election, it shows how much support there is for somebody who's unequivocal and vocal on their support of the Panth and sees the Panth and Delhi as two separate entities. And as messy and as muddled as it got later on, that's a separate issue. But it's very clear that the public sentiment in Punjab is,
And talk about electoral mandates. That even the 1992 election, which brought in Byan Singh's Congress government in Punjab, that was only on the back of the electoral boycott. So the Karakus, the Jathebandis, they issued a boycott of the election. So he doesn't even come into, so we don't talk about Gill being the Messiah and the hero of Punjab, etc. Him and Byan Singh don't even come in if there wasn't a boycott. So they came in because in largely most Sikh constituents, there was zero voting. So they came in, I think 25% of the Punjab polled and they won 10% of that. So again, it shows what the support was for the Karakus. So the Karakus said there was a boycott, and the Sikh of Punjab boycotted it. And earlier to that, in '89, there was overwhelming when there were candidates that were aligned with the Khalistan Sangharsh. I think it was 10 out of 11 seats went to them. So it's a clear support for the Sangharsh throughout.
And when there was those seats, like Baljit Singh mentioned earlier, the emergency president's rule was imposed on Punjab, and the government of Punjab was dissolved multiple times.
And just moving on, we only got a few clips left.
She will come in politics, but with a positive stand. And मैं जिथे तक हैगा जिन्ने जोगा हैगा मैं पंजाब नूं या इंडिया ਲਈ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ मैं पंजाब ਲਈ भी कुछ नहीं मैं पूरा डटा के लड़ूंगा अगेंस्ट रिवाइवल ऑफ मिलिटेंसी जिन्ना मैं एक्सपोज ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਰ ਸਕਿਆ ਮੈਂ ਕਰੂੰਗਾ।
ਤਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਦੌਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਂਟਰ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ?
ਮੇਰੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਫਰਸਟ ਫਿਊ ਸਟੈਪਸ ਵੀ ਹੈਵ ਟੇਕਨ। Signs are revival of terrorism in Punjab. In 10-12 years time things will be bad. ਕਹਿੰਦੇ how can you say that? ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਤਰਨ ਸਾਈਡ ਤੇ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ objectionable pictures ਕਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪੋਸਟ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਸਟ੍ਰੇ ਇਨਸੀਡੈਂਟਸ ਆਫ ਲੁੱਟ ਖੋ
ਕਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਆਬਜੈਕਸ਼ਨੇਬਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ?
ਤੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਟੈਰਰਿਸਟ ਦੀ ਕਿਲਿੰਗਸ ਦੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਮਾਰੇ ਪਏ ਨੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੈਂਟੀਮੈਂਟਸ ਨਾਲ ਖੇਡ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਮਾੜਾ ਇੰਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਔਨ ਯੂਥ।
So in here, basically, what he's saying is he's left Chandigarh and he's gone to Tarn Taran. He's gone to Punjab, right? Like, a major center in Punjab. And he's left to the comfort and, the seclusion of his own place. And he's shocked to see that, there's pictures of Shaheed Singhs and support for, what he says the terror is. And that's because there is, and that's the reality. And it's a massive fault line. He talks about this fear of the revival of the militancy. He sees a picture and thinks that, the armed struggle is going to come again because it is an underlying fault line. This issue hasn't been resolved. It is the underbelly of, Punjabi Sikh sentiment that erupts and comes forth at crucial moments of conflict and clash and tension with the Indian state. And it hasn't gone away because it was never a law and order issue. It was never an issue of Punjabis being misled or manipulated. It was about the fundamental relationship between the Guru Khalsa Panth and Delhi Darbar and the Indian state. It's a question of our sovereignty. So of course, the support that for Khalistan is continuing to grow.
And ਇਹਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੇ like ਤੇਰਾ ਭਰਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੁਝ ਕਰ ਸਕਿਆ, what are you going to do? Because ਜਿੰਨਾ ਜੋਗਾ ਹੈਗਾ.
And you know what? It just highlights, if he is being genuine, how like delusional, secluded he has been. Because anywhere you go in Punjab, there's pictures of Santri everywhere on the back of people's cars. So moving on now to a point about Santri when they discuss this.
ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਸੰਤ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਜੀ, ਮੇਰੇ ਲਈ ਸੰਤ ਨੇ, ਮੈਂ ਸੰਤ
ਨਹੀਂ,
ਕਹਿਣਾ.
that is something very
ਮੇਰਾ ਪਰਸਨਲ ਓਪੀਨੀਅਨ ਹੈ.
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ, ਮੇਰਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਪਰਸਨਲ ਓਪੀਨੀਅਨ ਹੈ. I don't like him and I won't like to comment on that.
I would. ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਢਾਇਆ, ਆਪਣਾ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਢਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ. ਅਗਰ ਭਿੰਡਰਾਂਵਾਲਾ ਨੇ, ਅਗਰ ਉਹ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੂੰ ਬਚਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਢਾਇਆ ਜਾਵੇ, ਖੁਦ ਬਾਹਰ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਬਚ ਜਾਂਦਾ. ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਚੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਨਿਕਲੇ? ਵਾਈ ਉਹ ਐਕਟੀਵਿਟੀਜ਼ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਕਿਉਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ?
ਨਹੀਂ, ਜਦੋਂ ਘੇਰਾ ਹੀ ਪੈ ਗਿਆ
ਬਾਕੀ 34 ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਉੱਥੇ ਤਾਂ ਸੰਤ ਸੀਗੇ, ਬਾਕੀ 34 ਹੋਰ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਆਰਮੀ ਚੜੀ, ਉੱਥੇ ਤਾਂ ਸੰਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੇ.
ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਜੀ ਵੀ ਚੱਕਰ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕਿਰਨ ਗੱਲ ਸੁਣੋ, ਯੂ ਵੋਂਟ ਬੀ ਏਬਲ ਟੂ ਟੈਕਲ ਦਿਸ. ਉਹਦੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਵੀ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਸਟੋਰੀ, ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ. ਤੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਤਾਂ ਸੈਂਕੜਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੀਗੇ ਤੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਦਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ 34 'ਚੋਂ ਕੀ.
So first thing, it's interesting that he doesn't want to talk about Sant Jarnail Singh, whether it's because he's shook or he just doesn't have the capacity, or he's been instructed to stay away from directly commenting on Sant Jarnail Singh. He doesn't remember. He doesn't say Khalistan. He doesn't mention any Shaheed Singhni's name. He only mentions Pindrawale, and he doesn't want to comment on it. She does, and when she does, she says that classic kind of narrative line that they were hiding in the Gurdwara. Why didn't they just come out?
It's interesting. So he didn't actually mention Santji.
He does.
Makkar does.
Yeah, Makkar.
He says, "What do you think about her?" So he wouldn't even.
And then he tells her off, and he says, Kiran, you won't be able to handle this.
It's interesting as well. If you guys want to rewind it back, is when he says, "I wouldn't want to comment on that," and she says, "I will," and you should see the way he looks at her.
Yeah.
Because they're training, obviously they've been given, or she was obviously going outside of that.
Yeah, she's
and maybe it's a case of because like Sanji is now is beyond kind of that thing. Like maybe in the 80s, when they were trying to in the early 80s when they're trying to do that kind of propaganda against Sanchi. Now they know that look, all had thought of it's gone. He's.
I think at that time as well, they had all of their soldiers in the field. They had blanket protection to kill anybody who they wanted to. And even then, especially when Sanchi was around, it was very difficult for them to carry out that type of violence. It's only after that point, and
But it's clear now that they even the Indian state understands that Sanchi has gone past this point now. Like in Punjab, amongst
it's settled,
Sikh,
basically.
it's settled. Like they're not going to. We've not won that one. Now we can try and do what we can do with the Khalistan Sangharsh.
And then so when she makes that point, right? Like, why didn't they come out of the Gurdwara? Then Makkar says, what about the other Gurdwara? And then Dickie's response, which is quite a good response from the Indian guy, he says, what about all the other Gurdwara where nothing happened? So for Dickey, his logic is very clear. It's the Parti Dilli logic, which is if you support Khalistan, you stand with the Panth, then you are guilty. You're a terrorist. You need to be destroyed. Whether you're in one Gurdwara or 50 Gurdwara, the enemy is very clear to Dickey. He says the bloody terrorist where he starts off with. He's got that that bit between his teeth. He's got that really clear perception of the Singhs, the Karkus, the Singhnia, that they are bad and they need to be destroyed. So for him, it doesn't matter if you invade Darbar Sahib, you invade one Gurdwara, 20, 50, you kill the Jathedar of the Akal Takht, you kill their family, you kill, all of these innocents by mistake. It doesn't matter. So Dickey Gill he's showing his cards and his positions very, very clearly. And obviously, this narrative point is childish. It doesn't even, you can only say this if you don't understand what the Sikhs were fighting for. And all of this has been debunked and been talked about so many times, and it only exists, this logic only exists within those Indian aligned circles.
This is why it's important for us to identify the Indian narrative and to push back, because even this idea, this point about the other Gurdwara, that started as a critique of the Indian government's justification
Of invading specifically Darbar Sahib.
So that's how it started, where the Indian government said that this was about Santji, and then someone might have said, well, why did you attack the other Gurdwara? But along the way, that's kind of become the whole narrative for us as well. So we have to be careful that we don't internalize, because when we say wasn't he in all the other Gurdwara, He was. That's the point.
Yeah.
Like jithe o Nojwan active sige, jithe were politically active Sikh, and they were fighting against the state. That's where they went. And we shouldn't be apologetic of that. So when he says that, he's correct. That they didn't go to all the thousands of other gurdwara. They went to, I think what the figures are now 100
something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very large number, because that's how the rebellion in Punjab, the revolution, the uprising, the lair, whatever word you want to use, it had gone past Santji. Now it's not just about Santji and those things and Singhnia. Now it's like throughout Punjab. Now it's the countryside. Now, according to the Balchi, according to the Indian Army, it's all Amritari Sikh.
But do you know, I don't understand his point fully though. He's saying, what about the other Gurdwara, as in the army wasn't against Sikh?
He's saying they only attacked those Gurdwara which were guilty.
Out of the hundreds of Gurdwara, they only went to Darbar Sahib, and why those Gurdwara? Why those 110 or whatever it was? Why not? Why didn't they go to all the
Every
others?
single
It's like when he's saying with by Gurdev Singh Ji Konke, when he says, look at his background.
He's not innocent.
He's not innocent. So for him, it's very
and it's
clear.
like, it's part of that Indian nationalistic rhetoric where if you're Hindi Hindu, innit, that kind of thing, that outside of that you have no value. Your life has no value.
Okay, so now moving on to the final clip.
ਚਾਹੇ ਕ੍ਰਿਸਚੀਅਨਿਟੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਗਈ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰੈਸ ਕਰ ਗਏ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਕਰ ਗਏ। ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਕੈਂਡੀਨੇਵੀਅਨ ਕੰਟਰੀਜ਼, ਆਸਟਰੀਆ, ਲਕਸਮਬਰਗ ਐਂਡ ਤਿੰਨ ਚਾਰ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਉੱਥੇ ਰਿਲੀਜਨ ਨਾਮ ਦੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੀ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ। ਐਂਡ ਦੇ ਆਰ ਦ ਹੈਪੀਐਸਟ ਕੰਟਰੀਜ਼ ਇਨ ਦ ਵਰਲਡ।
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਰੱਬ ਨੂੰ?
ਨਹੀਂ, ਮੈਂ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਲ ਪਾਵਰ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦਾ, ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਮੰਨਦਾ।
ਕਿਸੇ ਧਰਮ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਨਦੇ?
ਧਰਮ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਨਦਾ, ਗੁਰੂਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦਾ। ਜਿੰਨਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦਾ, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦਾ, ਓਨਾ ਹੀ ਕ੍ਰਿਸ਼ਨ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦਾ, ਓਨਾ ਹੀ ਮਹਾਤਮਾ ਬੁੱਧ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦਾ, ਓਨਾ ਹੀ ਜੀਸਸ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਸਟ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦਾ। ਜਿੰਨੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ, ਦੇ ਵਰ ਫਾਈਨੈਸਟ ਪਰਸਨਸ ਔਨ ਥੀਸ ਪਲੈਨਟਸ। ਪਰ ਗੁਰੂ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਓਵਰ ਪੀਰੀਅਡ ਆਫ ਸੈਂਚੁਰੀਜ਼ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨ ਬਣ ਗਏ।
So firstly, Austria and Luxembourg aren't Scandinavian countries. But it's true. I mean, Austria and Luxembourg aren't Scandinavian countries. I mean, just like a lot of things, Dickie Gill, doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's presenting the vision of religion that India, particularly Indian politicians, love adopting. Of this like universal path of Guru Sahib and Krishna and everybody and Jesus, they're all one. Modi, like you see it in Modi, right? He'll come to Punjab, put a pug on. He'll go Hardwar and he'll dress up like a Brahmin, right? And he's playing that. Dickie Gill's playing that classic kind of card, right? That religion here is the problem.
The thing is,
I don't think he knows what he believes.
He says he doesn't believe in any dharam, and that's why he doesn't understand Sant.
Yeah,
that's why they're saying, and it's a very, very simplistic argument that they used to have some sort of weight with, Indians in general, about like, why didn't he just come out? Because they don't understand that Santji said, Santji said that it's better if every Sikh die, then we stop living like Sikh. A good Sikh's beard was cut and tamak was spat in his mouth, and he came holding his beard to Santji. And Santji first said to him that like, "Tere gatra ka paane tu kyun mar janda? Why don't you just die there than coming all the way to me?" And then he says on stage that if this is the kind of thing that's going to happen with us, then it's better that we all die. We fight and die, then we live like this. So that's why, because dharam no ni manda, Sikh no ni manda. That's why he doesn't understand what Santji was about. He wouldn't understand Baba Gurbakh Singh Ji's last stand. He wouldn't understand Baba Deep Singh Ji Shaheed as well. So, yeah.
And it just further shows how disconnected he is from Sikhi.
But at some point in the interview as well, he calls himself a Sikh as well. He doesn't shy away from that. He calls himself a Sikh and he says, Sadde Varge Sikh, right? KPS Gill. He sees KPS Gill as a Sikh though. He probably sees KPS Gill as a better Sikh than Sant Jarnail Singh, who he sees as somebody who's distorted Sikhi and isn't a true Sikh. But to him, KPS Gill is a true Sikh, even though KPS Gill, KPS Gill is a true Sikh because he respected Guru Granth Sahib and he drank outside of the house. And when he did,
he was loyal to India first.
Yeah, he was loyal to India. He respected Guru Granth Sahib. Like, it's a really kind of arrogant mentality that, this guy is presenting, which is, we respect Guru Granth Sahib in the Gurdwara. Jitte sharab di jagah, utte si sharab peeni hai. Jitte, India di jagah, utte si, sadda Bharat mahan, right? Like, it's a really, really
thing is, how different really is that ideology when you boil it down to Kach Kara Karpan and Opejo Pakistan? like the right wing Hindu sloganeering in the 80s and 90s. Like essentially, that's what they're saying, isn't it? That there's no space for this other, isn't it?
There's no space for a Gursikh. There's no space for a Sikh that expresses their Padshahi.
There's only a space for Sikh as KPS Gill, right?
As
if you
KPS
do
Gill,
your part, do it at home, before and after your alcohol, whatever, and the rest of his whole life is in service of the Indian state and killing other Sikhs, then you're a Sikh.
And then, having peace and harmony in Punjab, and and he sees religion as the problem, and he'll talk about, we want development in Punjab and be part of, India's progress. Because to him, progress is accumulating wealth, Bharat becoming stronger financially, you becoming, educated on a dunyavi sense. To him, Sikhi is the cause of problems and the cause of unhappiness, because he's like, look, Scandinavian countries, they don't believe in God, and, they're happy.
But then they wouldn't apply this logic to extreme Hindu ideology when that's getting pushed, right? It's only Sikh.
There's two villains in KPS Gill's brother's mind. One is the Sikh and the other is the Muslim. To him, he says in certain other points in his interview where, Hindu and Sikhs we're the least communal people. There's been no communal issues. Muslim are the most communal thing. And again, it's because he's pushing this, pro-India narrative. And, and it's completely disconnected from reality and fact, because in November 1984, they were shouting pro-Hindu and pro-India slogans as they were butchering Sikhs in Delhi. Like that whole, violence, that whole genocide that occurred in India in November 1984 across India was built on the fault lines of the Sikhs are your enemy, and you as a Hindu, you need to rise. Hindutva is built on this, idea of like Hindu supremacy.
He doesn't seem to have an issue with that.
He doesn't seem to have an issue with that. Yeah.
So that's the thing. His whole, when they're near the end of this interview, his whole piece is just contradictory of itself.
Yeah. And then he presents his wife, right? Like, I think what the real kind of thing comes out where the agenda where he's like, my wife is going to run for elections.
Hope you don't get shot.
Yeah. And, they're trying to, drum up sympathy or like kind of support. I think this video, overall, I don't think this video goes in favor of Dickie Gill or, this whole story that he's spinning, because KPS Gill is a non-controversial figure to KPS Gill's family. Like Dickie Gill and KPS Gill's nephew Hartosh Bal, and who's a journalist. To them, he's an uncontroversial figure, and to the Delhi Sarkar. But to Sikhs in Punjab, I think is very clear, and people can read the comments. One of the most liked comments on the videos is like, "Edda de bande naal interview karni nahi chahiye."
So just going through some of the most liked comments, right? Some of these have thousands of likes, and what the kind of sentiment are they showing?
Veer ajehe parwar di interview karni hi galt hai. So many of them are like that similar kind of, vibe that, the KPS Gill was a butcher. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
We shouldn't even give him space.
Especially if it's going to be unchecked. I think Makkar doesn't do a good job in challenging these points.
And do you think these kind of conversations now of KPS Gill opening up more, these are needed at this time?
I think so, for sure. I think KPS Gill is never going to be irrelevant, because KPS Gill shows us how the Indian state's machinery will has worked and will continue to work, because that model has been successful for them, and it's something that they will continue to deploy, whether it's in Assam, Kashmir, Nagaland, Manipur, Punjab, in any place that challenges India's supremacy, whether it's in Tamil Eelam. Like, the atrocities committed by the Sri Lankan government are so similar to what happened in Punjab, because it's the same model and the blueprint that is being used. So all of this stuff is incredibly relevant, because we can't be misled if we know our atiyas and we understand the reality of individuals like KPS Gill. And also, it's really important to see that where the kind of galbat is sitting for these types of people, it hasn't moved forward. There's no depth. Like, when we watched this and we were talking about this, like how Dickie Gill doesn't actually say anything of value. It's just he lets this like kind of a feeling.
The thing is,
out.
I'll turn it back to you and say, then what could you say in defense if you were Dickie Gill?
If you defend, like,
all you can do is completely deny that anything bad ever happened.
No, or you go full out and you stick to your convictions. Say they were terrorists in Yemen, we killed them,
yeah.
and we're going to kill them again because they were terrorists. And he tries to say that, right? Like
It's a veil,
when he talks about the Pahalgam and Pakistan, and he's like, if you went and killed their prime minister, their generals, he's like, then would you call those people terrorists? The other thing is, Dickie Gill he's a coward. He doesn't have the guts.
What he said was, he said that you wouldn't go kill the prime minister. You'd drop a bomb there.
Yeah.
And when all those people die there, would you be a butcher then?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the point, Dickie.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I mean, in his position, it's a very, very difficult thing to justify. It's a very, very difficult thing to explain and to try to provide some sort of... and that's why he fails to do so.
The Indian courts justify it, right? Completely. They're like, these are the methods that were needed during this time. And, the terrorists were so bad that we had to burn them down and kill their families.
This is across the Indian system, the machinery. Like even, wasn't it yourself that was talking about how even the left,
Yeah.
all of a
Even
sudden...
the communists, like in the communists in
yeah.
India, like communism is meant to be fighting against imperialism and all this kind of stuff or whatever. In India, the communists side with the Indian state and carry out atrocities. The left sides with the Indian state because India's nationalism is so perverse and like, it has this really weird thing. It's because, all of those ideas are in Dickie Gill's interview. They hate religion, right? So they see Sikhi as this religion and they see being Dharmi and being part of Sikhi as being mindless. And, you can be...
And a threat to their system, right?
And a threat to their system and a threat to progress, a threat to democracy, a threat to, us having AI integration in India. Like, it's complete surface level nonsense. Whereas the Panth sees Sant Jarnail Singh as a surma because of the way he lived his life in it. It's very different.
These guys are coming forward now as a tool again of the state, right? I'm thinking, why don't they just sit back, relax, and just fizzle out? Why have they stood up again and they are running for office again?
Dickie Gill's getting brave. That's what it is.
Yeah, but also I think they're seeing that wave change. Yeah. That the sentiment was always there, but now that there's different media, obviously work like yourself are doing, and now they have. He mentioned you guys. He said like all these WhatsApp groups and things that are going on. That's what they're talking about. These independent media groups, independent platforms that are springing up, and they're shining an uncomfortable light on these people's history. And the other thing is the reason why it's important for us to continue to look at individuals like KPS Gill is because where's his batchmates, right? Where is Ajit Doval? Where was he then? Ajit Doval was the one who allegedly was inside the Darbar Sahib during Black Thunder, and now he's at the head of the NSA or something, right? So a lot of these intelligence individuals, OP Sharma, etc., that were mentioned, it's to show us that where have they all kind of migrated to? Which institutions where are they in now, right?
That whole machinery that was funding funding the killing of
It hasn't
Sikhs.
gone away, right?
It hasn't gone away at all. Their tactics have changed. They're just as, if not more, invested in challenging and changing Sikh perception. So that's why conversations like this are so important. They're so heavily invested. Like literally censorship on social media is like one of the most blatant examples of banning an account, right? I think I was looking on Reddit, about how Basics of Sikh is banned in India.
It's still banned in India.
Right, it's still banned
after multiple appeals, and ultimately they just take it back to the Indian courts and say that we've got a court ruling from the local government, so we can't do anything.
Yeah. And it's been a continuous pattern. I remember when NSYF was like banned on social media years ago, and like to us, we kind of took it in our stride. We were like, I think at the time we were like, we're doing good work, right, like shabash, and like from there it's just grown and grown and grown. Like humanitarian organizations, news channels, just like their censorship has just grown.
They're losing
massively.
a fight. They're fighting a losing battle.
They are 100%. I think that's just one like obvious part of their strategy. Then there's all of this content production and this cultural production. How individuals like Diljit Dosanjh are being used, and how
that's a really important point. That's a really important part of Gill's legacy.
Yeah, massive. The space that they're given to,
he introduced that, right?
Yeah, he did. He did with the musicians, the Lutjarpana. Like they started promoting Lutjarpana and Ashleel culture in Punjab, right? Like through the types of musics and creating space, because they like Taddi Vara and like Kavishri and Gurbani. They're trying to eliminate centers of that. Then they're creating space for this so-called narrative of Tarakki. They're completely trying to change the culture of Punjab, which is so deeply tied to.
That was a major part of Gill's legacy and Beyond Singh's legacy, where they would promote some of these kind of artists and
Protect them, give them police protection,
like Jamkilla, right?
yeah.
Another individual. There was a movie made on that.
Yeah, massive high profile movie made on these individuals. And again, in like the Chamkila movie, could do a whole other podcast to it. But in there, like the Chamkila is this like again like this misunderstood individual, and they don't show that Chamkila wherever he went with police protection. They don't show how he openly challenged Karku Singhs when they told him Eddan de Gane Naga, right? Like in Punjabi, right? There's no hello. What's hello in Punjabi? They say Sat Sri Akal, right? Because Punjabi's boli, Punjab's consciousness is deeply tied to Sikhi. Like Chardi Kala becomes like this Punjabi word, but it's not. It's a Khalsa bolla. So they're trying to present this like secular, atheist like Punjabi, and promote a culture that is
It's one of the attacks against Sikh.
Yeah, it is one of the attacks against Sikh. And with the film coming out with Shaheed by Jaswant Singh Kalra, again, you're going to see the same narrative production. These were isolated cases. These were a few bad apples. These people were misunderstood. Kalra was fighting for a better India. He was fighting, to improve society. Like, literally the word Khalistan is not mentioned in this interview in the same way these other films, they don't mention Khalistan because it has so much power.
Preposterous, because he's talking about his brother. Yeah. He's talking about the era in which he was policing and the Sangharsh, but he's not mentioning what it was for.
Yeah,
and that's how much they're afraid of it. That's how much they're trying to erase, and that's why work like this is so important.
Yeah.
So one myth that I wanted to destroy was this idea of KPS Gill being a super cop, like this great tactical genius who came in and solved this issue for the Indian state. And we spoke about earlier before that he was essentially just a front man. He was barbaric, he was sadistic, but it wasn't part of his strategies. His strategies were kicking a protester to death, right? And that's why he was brought in. He had that violent tendency. What he did do really well was to protect his subordinates. So like Ajit Sandhu, Smed Saini, Izahar Alam, the list goes on and on. So that's what he did really, really well. And he had a degree in English, so they loved that because he would hold press conferences and he would speak really well. But in terms of his tactical brilliance, again, there's a reason why the Indian government, like there's individuals like O.P. Sharma, we spoke about before. He was like the ADGP. He was allegedly the one. Actually, it was Dr. Sangat Singh who spoke about that. I believe Dr. Sangat Singh was a senior bureaucrat in the Indian government, and he's wrote a book. And in there, he talked about O.P. Sharma, how he was one of the individuals behind the scene who was actually organizing like the operations and the intelligence side of things. But they kept a backseat. They kept a quiet profile. Because they were smart and they didn't want to live the rest of their lives under Z security. But B, because again, as O.P. Sharma, a Brahmin, right? If he comes forward, then it's a clearer link for Sikh that sadete Brahmin atyachar kar raha. Whereas with KPS Gill, it muddies the water. But in terms of this simplistic view that he came in and and he had this tactical brilliance from the 1980s, we know that the SAS were involved, right? So in the attack on Darbar Sahib, the British SAS came out. They were, I think they sold them helicopters, military hardware, etc., etc. We know that the Russians, KGB, had trained and were selling weapons to India, and also Indian military personnel, especially those involved in counter-terrorism, underwent training in Israel during the 1980s, facilitated by Mossad. This was more covert, and in 1992, when India normalized relations with Israel, it became open. So what we need to make sure is that we don't take these simplistic ideas and run with them, that KPS Gill was brilliant or he had this tactical brilliance, but really there's this whole other web or a whole other network. There's a lot. The picture's a lot deeper.
Just some final thoughts, like going forward now, for a message to Sangat who have heard and learned about all this stuff. Like, we live now in society in UK where, for example, ties with India are stronger than ever. I've even heard stories of like them sending Indian soldiers here for training in UK bases, right? So what can we do now going forward?
There's a lot to do going forward. Honestly, there's a lot to do. One of the key things has been understanding the Khalistan Sangharsh and the Jathebandiyan and the Jeevniya of the Singhnia. We always say this because it's is so important because it stops us from falling for these traps again and again, like we've seen with, you know, this recent India-Pakistan war. You know, Sikhs have completely taken a back seat, whereas in South Asia, in Punjab, you know, Sikhs were instrumental in uprooting the Mughal regime, uprooting the Angrez, you know, rocking Hindutva and the Indian state to its core, offering one of the biggest challenges. And now in this situation, Sikhs have become passive, you know, bystanders and observers, appealing to India for peace, and losing that real sense of anak and pride that, you know, individuals like Sant Jarnail Singh brought to the fore, you know, and reminded us of, you know, Surmaya, and like our Qawm is only going to do tarakki through, you know, the zeal of Qurbani and Sangharsh that is vital to who we are. I think that's equally important to us here. कि चलो इत्थे इंग्लैंड दे विच खालिस्तान दी लड़ाई नहीं लगन लगी, and it's going to be in Punjab. But it's so important here because we need to understand what our role and our contribution to the struggle is, that this isn't history, this isn't something that's from the past, or something that doesn't concern us. It directly impacts us and generations of Sikhs to come, because this is a Sadivi Sangharsh that started from Guru Nanak Pasha, and Sadiyan tak ye Sangharsh chalna hai, because Zulm is never going to be finished. So the Khalsa needs to understand its role in the world. And individuals like Dickie Gill and mouthpieces like this, and even Makkar, like, who's trying to do favors, is going into an interview with this individual, one, you know, trying to pretend to be neutral, but not at the same time. Makkar doesn't have the politics. He's not going there as a Khalistani or somebody whose loyalties to the Panth. He's trying to be neutral and objective.
And it's interesting, in the hook right at the start of the video, it's like him doing questioning and like trying to get him like Dickie Gill. But then as you watch the whole interview, it kind of becomes more
100%. It leans towards Dickie Gill, and Makkar doesn't present those challenges. And where he doesn't challenge the fundamental question, which is of liberation, not of justice or legal restitution. That's not what Sikhs are after. And Makkar can only present that. Makkar can't say Sikhanu Khalistan Chaidaya, and like, you know, your brother was a butcher, and you know, it's because of people like him that we need to continue fighting. He doesn't take a position, and I think that's what's really important, and that's something that we need to continually have at the forefront, that Khalistan is first and foremost a Hathiarband Sangharsh, and that is what it is. It's not a human rights struggle. It's not a struggle for legal recognition. Those are byproducts. Human rights violations occur because we are fighting for, Sikhs were fighting for their liberation, and that's why human rights violations were committed. So we need to understand what, like, the fundamental premise is, because you see it with every issue again and again, right? It becomes like a legal question or a United Nations question, or a question of a minister should say this. Like, look at Jaggi's case, for example. It's coming up to like 6 years. And that Jaggi's been in prison longer than 6 years.
I think is, you know, if JSC Sangharsh nu again hi tor sakde, at least let us not take a step back. Let's at least maintain that position that people had fought and died for, and not take a step back from that. And you know, in terms of people like Dickie Gill, he's gonna put his head above the parapet and try this kind of narrative, this propaganda. And only if we are, you know, strong in our Sikhi and our Sangharsh, that we can rebut these kind of challenges.
So I think wrap it up there. So thank you everyone for watching. Hopefully we uncovered a lot of the myths, and it was a very informative podcast. So thank you to both Bajis here. If you want to learn more about these topics, we've done multiple podcasts about Khalistan, about the Sangharsh, about Indira Gandhi. So check out those playlists. If you want to learn more about the work that these guys are doing, then where can they reach you?
And nsyf.org.uk, info@nsyf.org.uk.
I just wanted to say that everything that Singh spoke about today, it's all now widely accessible. It's all online. You know, there's a time when these were reports and books that people had to get hold of through, you know, difficult means. And now it's freely accessible in websites like Punjab Digital Library, Insaf, etc., nsyf.org.uk. Of course, we've digitized a lot of this as well. So there's no excuse now to not access this material.
And you can read all about the Jeevnia of the Singhnia from tribune1984.com as well. They've put in a lot of work to bring this atiyas to the forefront, and you know, through them we learn, you know, that fundamental difference, right? Our heroes and their heroes. You'll learn who KPS Gill is. Just go read the Jeevnia. if you really want to know who this individual was.
Yeah, I think that's the best message. Stay informed. Don't give in to like this misinformation, this propaganda. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.